LoveLore Library. Chapter 1337. Everyone's face was filled with disbelief, anger, and many other emotions. They all looked at Ning Xuemo with disdain and disdain. Their demon realm was currently in troubled times. They should have worked hard and united as one. They should have a shrewd and powerful demon emperor to lead them to make a comeback. How could they let a good-for-nothing woman be their honorable demon emperor? If this spread out, it would be a joke in the three realms. No, absolutely not. A highly respected minister in the demon realm kowtowed until his head was bleeding. His voice was full of sorrow, "Your Majesty. This old minister thinks that this woman is a scourge. This minister boldly requests Your Majesty to consider the overall situation and get rid of this evildoer. Kill her. Kill her. Get rid of the evildoer for the people. Kill the evildoer. Kill the evildoer." For a moment, the crowd was indignant. Because of this woman, their demon emperor was dispirited. Because of this woman, their demon emperor did not think about improving himself and did not consider the overall situation of the demon realm. Every day, he only thought about pleasing her and did many things that they thought were inconceivable. Ning Xuemo indifferently swept a glance at the group of people who wanted nothing more than to pounce on her and tear her apart. The corners of her lips curled up slightly. She did not expect that when she came to the demon realm, she would be treated as Bao Si, Su Daji, and the like, hee. Shuailan listened silently at first. His handsome face did not have a trace of emotion. When the following people finished speaking, he slowly stood up and walked to the highly respected minister. There seemed to be a hint of a smile in his tone. "You don't agree?" The minister trembled violently under his pressure, but he still firmly said, "This minister does not agree." She. Ah. Shuailan's hand clenched in the air and the minister instantly exploded. Not even his bones were left behind. He was shattered into thousands of pieces. The smell of blood instantly filled the hall. The shadow of death shrouded everyone's head. Shuailan walked to the second person. The smile on his face was still faint, as if what he had just crushed was just a watermelon. He looked down at the person condescendingly. "What about you? Do you agree?" The second person's body trembled violently. He couldn't even speak a complete sentence. He looked at Shuailan as if he was looking at a devil. This subject. He repeated the word subject for a long time but couldn't say a single word. Shuailan's smile gradually disappeared. With a clench of his hand, the second person went to accompany the first person. Shuailan smiled faintly as he looked at the pool of blood where the man had been standing. "You're just too long-winded." He slowly walked up to the third person. The third person was so scared that he was trembling like a sieve. Before Shuailan could ask him anything, he shouted, "This subject agrees. This subject agrees. We will obey the orders of the demon emperor." Shuailan smiled with satisfaction and said lightly, "Get up." That minister stood up, trembling. With this person taking the lead, countless people trembled as they stood up and echoed, "This subject also agrees. This subject also agrees. This subject will follow the orders of the demon emperor." Only then did Shuailan leisurely walk back to the main hall and sat at the side. Bloodthirsty looked at the sudden change in the situation. He could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. He was going to die anyway. Before he died, he might as well curse to his heart's content. "Shuailan, do you think this kind of violent suppression will be effective? You can shut our mouths, but can you shut the mouths of the people of the demon world? Aren't you afraid that the demon world that you worked so hard to gather will be disloyal?" Chapter 1338. Aren't you afraid that the demons will be disheartened and become a pile of loose sand again? You're really blind. You actually want to push a beautiful vase up to be the demon emperor. Is she worthy? We demons have always respected martial strength. The strongest person is the demon emperor. I'm not as good as others. I admit defeat to you, but I refuse to accept it. The entire demon realm refuses to accept it. She can't even compare to my weakest soldier. What right does she have to be our demon emperor? Does she have 2 big legs to serve you well? The last sentence was simply unbearable. Shui Lan's eyes darkened. Just as he was about to raise his hand to pinch Bloodthirsty to death, he inadvertently raised his head and suddenly paused. Although the people in the hall didn't dare to say anything, their expressions were extremely indignant. They looked at Ning Xuemo with eyes full of disdain and hatred, as if they were looking at an enemy. Shui Lan's heart sank. Indeed, Bloodthirsty was telling the truth. He couldn't rely on violence to suppress everyone. He could suppress them for a while, but he couldn't suppress them forever. Like this, even if he pushed Ning Xuemo up, other people would only treat her as a cover and wouldn't take her seriously. In the future, there would be no end to the chaos. Who knows, maybe when the council disbanded, a large portion of the devils would find an opportunity to leave. The popularity that he had painstakingly regained would once again be in disarray. Unless Ning Xuemo made a move, Shui Lan couldn't help but glance at Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo didn't have any intention of replying. Her gaze fell on Tang Yuan. Her expression was indifferent and cold. No one could tell what she was thinking. However, looking at her current appearance, she really didn't have any intention of making a move. In the past, she was proud and couldn't be looked down upon. If anyone really offended her, she would definitely make them pay 10 times or 100 times the price. But now, she didn't seem to care about anything. Other than indifference, there was only indifference in her eyes. Shui Lan felt that his head had swelled up. Shui Lan didn't say anything. The atmosphere suddenly turned cold. Everyone in the hall thought that Shui Lan had nothing to say. They became even angrier and felt that Ning Xuemo was an eyesore. Finally, a person with ulterior motives stood up and bowed respectfully. Our demon realm has always respected martial strength. This new demon king must be even more powerful. Why don't you show us some of your skills so that we can be convinced? Shui Lan raised his eyes and looked at that person with a gaze as cold as ice. That person's remaining words were instantly frozen. As Bloodthirsty saw someone answer his question, he became more stirred up. He shouted, "Yeah, if she has the ability, let her show us her power. Why are you cowering there? What right does a slut who only relies on her face and thighs to win the favor of men have to be our demon king? If you really have the ability, then show it to everyone. Don't talk about defeating others. If she can defeat this general beside me, I can reluctantly respect you as the demon king." Bloodthirsty pointed at the devil beside him. Everyone's gaze followed him. When they saw that it was the most incompetent devil among their generals, the whole hall burst into laughter. Ning Xuemo's gaze lightly swept over and saw that the person was only Earth Stage Level 1. She didn't know how he became a general. That devil general saw Ning Xuemo's gaze sweep over and puffed out his chest. No matter how incompetent he was, defeating a weak beauty was very easy, but when Shui Lan's gaze swept over, he immediately became terrified. He knelt on the ground and didn't even dare to breathe. Chapter 1339. Ning Xuemo yawned lazily, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She had no interest in this demon world emperor at all. She didn't want to walk the same path as Shui Lan gave her such a big surprise without her consent. She would let him clean up this mess himself. She stretched again. She was sleepy again. These demons' impassioned words were nothing to her. She didn't listen to them at all, and couldn't be bothered to pay attention to them. If it wasn't for Tang Yuan desperately dragging her here, she wouldn't have come. Seeing that Ning Xuemo didn't move, Bloodthirsty thought that Ning Xuemo was a piece of trash. He mocked her without holding back. What? You can't beat this. Then do you still deserve to be a demon emperor? Ning Xuemo glanced at him, her eyes as cold as snow. Bloodthirsty actually felt a murderous aura. However, this murderous aura disappeared in an instant, making him think that it was just his imagination. He continued to provoke Ning Xuemo, but Ning Xuemo didn't even look at him. She obviously treated him like a barking dog. On the other hand, Shui Lan's eyes darkened, and his murderous aura became more and more obvious. He looked at Ning Xuemo again, but Ning Xuemo didn't even look at him. Her pretty face was expressionless, as if she didn't care. It was obvious that she thought he was meddlesome. Tang Yuan couldn't listen anymore. He ran in front of Bloodthirsty and pointed at his nose. Our Momo is very powerful. Who do you think you are to talk about her? Momo is as beautiful as a flower, her strength is off the charts, and her intelligence is outstanding. With a wave of her hand, she can sweep away millions of troops. You're ugly and stupid. Your skills are inferior, and your mouth is full of shit. Ning Xuemo, Shui Lan, little Tang Yuan's last sentence seemed to rhyme quite well. Bloodthirsty slowly lifted his eyes, looking at the little kid who wasn't even as tall as him when he was kneeling. A vicious gleam flashed in his eyes. Little Rice Dumpling was shocked by the hostility in his eyes and instinctively wanted to take a step back, but it was too late. Bloodthirsty suddenly laughed. The special rope on his body was broken into many pieces. He jumped up and grabbed Tang Yuan in front of him. Tang Yuan screeched. Bloodthirsty's fingers had pierced into his back and lifted him up single-handedly. Demonis, if you voluntarily scram, obediently serve men, and no longer attempt to encroach on the Demon Emperor's position, and release all of our brothers, I will let this brat go. If you don't agree, I will tear him apart. It turned out that the reason why Bloodthirsty had stalled for so long was to give him enough time to break his acupoints. Now that he had finally regained his freedom, he naturally wouldn't let go of any chance to escape. Shui Lan had set up countless barriers around the meeting hall. Even if he regained his freedom, he wouldn't be able to escape by himself. He could only take a hostage first. Naturally, he wanted to capture Ning Xuemo the most, but Shui Lan was sitting next to her, vaguely looking like he was protecting her. With Bloodthirsty's abilities, he probably wouldn't be able to capture Ning Xuemo. Instead, he would be sent flying by Shui Lan's palm. Furthermore, this little Demonis who looked like a pink dumpling wasn't very strong, and it seemed like that woman liked him a lot. More importantly, he was right next to him. He was a hostage that had delivered himself to his doorstep. He would take him first. He was a demon. Naturally, he wouldn't go easy on him just because he was a child. His 5 long nails pierced into Little Rice Dumpling's back, and blood instantly flowed down. Little Rice Dumpling's face instantly turned pale. He opened his mouth to cry, but he couldn't make a sound. Chapter 1340. Bloodthirsty's 5 fingers were like bayonets as he held Little Rice Bowl. He was about to threaten him again when a long, red shadow suddenly shot toward him. Before he could react, he felt the weight in his hand lighten, and Little Glutinous Dumpling suddenly disappeared. He raised his head in shock and saw that Ning Xuemo was still sitting there. She had just retracted the red ribbon in her hand when Little Rice Ball was lying on her knees. His body was still trembling from the pain and he could barely make a sound as he cried. Ning Xuemo's 10 fingers tapped Little Rice Ball's back a few times as if she was playing a pipa. Then, she took out some ointment from somewhere and applied it on his wounds. Her series of actions were like moving clouds and flowing water without any pause. In the blink of an eye, Little Rice Ball's bleeding had been stopped and he looked even more like a round rice ball. All the demons were speechless. Bloodthirsty was speechless. He had never thought that this seemingly weak woman would be able to snatch someone from his hands in one move. Furthermore, she had done it while he was on guard. How was that possible? Although he wasn't on guard against her, he was on guard against Shuailan, who was sitting next to her. This woman wasn't ordinary at all. Ning Xuemo put little rice ball down and slowly stood up. Then, she walked toward Bloodthirsty. At this moment, she was no longer as lazy as a sleeping beauty. Her eyes were dark, but there was a cold glint in the depths of her eyes. The invisible pressure around her shocked everyone present. Bloodthirsty was shocked by her aura and couldn't help but take a step back. However, he was also a ruthless person. Although he was shocked, he still managed to keep his composure. He raised his head and laughed. I didn't think that you would know some flowery moves. You're not just a coward. How about this? If you want to be the spirit demon king and you want everyone to respect you, you have to show your true abilities and fight a few rounds with my brothers. If you win against my 4 brothers, we'll respect you and never rebel. How about that? He was still very scheming. Now that he had no hostages in his hands, with Shuailan's ability, he would be able to quickly subdue him. When that time came, he and his brothers would have no way to survive. What he said was a dignified challenge to Ning Xuemo. As long as Ning Xuemo accepted the challenge, no matter who won or lost, he and his brothers would have a chance to survive. Furthermore, he had acted like a man in front of all the devils. If he could regain some of his reputation, it could be considered as killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Ning Xuemo walked until she was 2 meters away from him. She was clearly shorter than Bloodthirsty, but when she looked at him, it was as if she was looking down on him like a king. She slowly spat out 3 words, I accept your challenge. Bloodthirsty's eyes lit up. All right, then I'll send one of my brothers to warm up with your excellency. Shuai-1, you go. Train our new emperor well. Shuai-1 was the incompetent general just now. Good. You let me go first. I'll compete in this round. Shuai-1 clamored. Ning Xuemo indifferently glanced at him and froze him there. Her eyes swept over the leaders of Bloodthirsty and her lips curled up. Her voice was as indifferent as before, but the words she said were incomparably domineering. No need. You 5, come together. If you can beat me, I'll let you do whatever you want. Shuailan looked at Ning Xuemo who had released her aura, and his eyes flashed with brilliance. His Momo was finally back. The group of devils looked at each other in dismay. This woman had such a big tone. She wasn't afraid of the wind twisting her tongue. Chapter 1341. If it weren't for Shuailan sitting above, the demons would have burst into laughter. Everyone inwardly mocked Ning Xuemo for overestimating her capabilities. Bloodthirsty was the second most powerful person in the demon realm, second only to Shuailan. He was an Earth rank level 9, a very powerful existence. The reason why he was called Bloodthirsty was because he loved to kill. The number of people he had killed was countless, and his methods were even more cruel and terrifying. Ning Xuemo was such a weak vase that she couldn't even stand a gust of wind. Who knew how she would be destroyed in his hands? What's more, the 4 brothers who rebelled with him this time were also very powerful. One was Earth rank level 8, one was Earth rank level 7, one was Earth rank level 6, and the weakest was Earth rank level 5. These 5 people were all extremely cruel devils. Their hands were stained with who knew how much blood they had. 2 of them were even magic weapons used by mothers to scare crying children. Any one of these 5 people was enough to make Ning Xuemo drink a pot of water. She wanted to fight against 5 of them alone. Did she think that this was a game between children? Bloodthirsty couldn't help but laugh. You have guts. He glanced at Shuailan who was sitting next to him. However, if you can't beat them, will you find help? He was most afraid of Shuilan. I won't. Ning Xuemo answered succinctly. This girl's tone was so arrogant. Could it be that she really had some skills? Bloodthirsty's eyes were like hooks, sizing up Ning Xuemo for a while. If you lose, we can do whatever we want to you. What if we lose? What do you need us to do? Ning Xuemo's voice was indifferent and cold. I don't need you. So easy to talk to. Why? I never need dead people to do anything. Bloodthirsty. In other words, Ning Xuemo didn't plan to take them as her subordinates. If they lost, there was only one word, death. Bloodthirsty's eyes turned red. He took a deep breath and unsealed the acupuncture points of his 4 subordinates. Then, the 5 of them stood in 5 different directions. Bloodthirsty's voice was as cold as the winter. If you've chosen this, then, don't blame us for being impolite. They would beat this woman into a rag. Then, he threw it at Shuilan's face. The group of demons also became excited and automatically opened up a space for them to fight. Bloodthirsty was still worried. His eyes fell on Shuilan. You. What do you want to say? Do you have any objections? He was still worried that Shuilan would go back on his word and help Ning Xuemo. Shuilan's eyes darkened. He only said one sentence, since you're courting death, I have nothing to say. Hearing him, Bloodthirsty and the others thought that Shuilan was talking about Ning Xuemo. They couldn't help but look at each other. It seemed that their great monster king didn't love this woman as much as he loved her. Thus, Bloodthirsty and the others didn't have any more worries. The 2 sides finally started to fight, 20 moves. Only 20 moves. After 20 moves, Bloodthirsty fell heavily on the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. He couldn't even say a word. He could only gasp like a broken bellows. Blood was spurting out from his acupuncture points. This was especially true for his back. His spine had been forcefully severed, and he lay there like a boneless fish, unable to get up again. The other 4 who had fallen before him weren't in a better situation. 2 of them were dead, and the other 2 were dying. They were struggling at death's door. Their lives were in danger. The demon warriors were stunned. Chapter 1342. There were many experts among these people, but none of them could see how Ning Xuemo did it. Her movements were like a ghost, and her moves were clean and efficient. Moreover, her moves were ruthless, no less than any of the demons here. Her martial arts might not be as good as Shuilan's, but it was much better than anyone else's. Silence. It was so quiet that even the sound of a needle dropping could be heard. In this unprecedented silence, Ning Xuemo's lips curled up. She looked down at Bloodthirsty, who was still breathing, as if she was looking at a lowly ant. She said indifferently, "You've lost. Do you want to blow yourself up, or do you want someone to send you on your way?" Bloodthirsty choked on his breath. He closed his eyes, knowing that he had no way to live. To die a more manly death, he chose to blow himself up. When he blew himself up, the blood mist splashed everywhere. Ning Xuemo took a step back. She waved her hand, and a barrier appeared in front of her, blocking the blood mist. She didn't let a drop of dirty blood splash on her body. The other 2 who were still breathing also chose to cut their own throats. At this point, the 5 leaders of the rebellion had all died in this battle. The entire hall was filled with the smell of blood. However, this was nothing to the demons who had been licking blood on their blades all year round. They liked to kill. They didn't have good or evil, and they didn't have friends. The only thing they respected and obeyed was the strong. Thunderous applause resounded. The demons clapped their hands as hard as they could. They hated that they couldn't clap their hands until they were swollen. Amazing, too amazing. She had only used 20 moves to destroy the 5 great guardians of the demon clan. Who could do this? The demon clan had another expert. There was hope for their revival. Ning Xuema's previous reaction had become deep and reserved in their eyes. She was calm and composed. Only an expert, no, a demon emperor would have this kind of domineering aura. Who else could have this kind of domineering aura? Only her. Only her. She must be the demon emperor. The position of the demon emperor was hers. Ning Xuema stood there calmly. Her red robe fluttered even though there was no wind. Her face was delicate and her expression was cold. Her attacks were as fast as lightning, and she was very reserved. Wasn't this what little glutinous dumpling had said earlier? Our demon empress is as beautiful as a flower, her martial prowess is off the charts, and her intelligence is outstanding. So what he said was true. Little glutinous dumpling was also stunned. His mouth was so wide open that a pigeon egg could be stuffed in. After a while, he finally reacted and pounced forward. His eyes were filled with admiration. Momo, you're so amazing. Too powerful. He suddenly knelt down and said solemnly, Lord Demon Emperor will reign supreme for thousands of years. Little glutinous dumpling's words were like a signal. Countless people couldn't help but kneel down and prostrate themselves in worship towards Ning Xuema. Their shouts were like a mountain. Lord Demon Emperor will reign supreme for thousands of generations. Lord Demon Emperor will reign supreme for thousands of generations. Waves of shouts rang out like the tide. With Ning Xuema as the center, all the devils kowtowed deeply. Ning Xuema stood among them, exuding the domineering aura of a ruler. Shuailan slowly walked down. Something seemed to be surging out of his eyes. He grasped her hand and knelt down on one knee. Momo, you were originally the devil ancestor. In this devil realm, you were originally the only one who reigned supreme. I, Shuailan, am willing to accompany you and protect you for all eternity. Ning Xuema lowered her eyes to look at him. She slowly pulled her hand away and said indifferently, I never said I wanted to be the demon emperor. Shuailan was clearly using this method to force her to return to her identity as Shui Emo. Moreover, he didn't even discuss it with her beforehand. Chapter 1343. Did he think that she was so easy to fool? She was Ning Xuema, not Shui Emo. He'd better remember this point. Ning Xuema didn't even look back as she turned around and left. Only one hall of demons remained, looking at each other in dismay. Then, everyone turned their attention to Shuailan. Shuailan's eyes darkened. After a while, he smiled. His Momo, compared to her previous life, had a lot more personality in this life. He liked it. He waved his hand, indicating for everyone to disperse. He stood in his original position, lost in thought for a moment, and then walked out with large strides. Ning Xuema went back to sleep. After resting for so many days, the injuries on her body had mostly healed. Perhaps it was because she had already cultivated to Earth rank level 9, but this time, even without Shinjuli's medicine, the injuries on her body healed very quickly. Now, her skin had already returned to its original delicate state. But what about her heart? Shuailan felt that he seemed to understand her less and less. Although she used to be expressionless in front of him, he was still able to observe the changes in her mood in the slightest way. But now, it was as if she was wearing a mask. He couldn't read the slightest bit of her inner thoughts from her face. For example, in order to make her agree to be the Demon Emperor, he deliberately let people address her as Demon Emperor Your Majesty in the places where she appeared, and kneeled down to salute her. But she never had any reaction. She just walked past those people, as if she didn't hear them. Those demons were completely ignored. After a few times, those demons didn't dare to force her, and didn't dare to deliberately address her as Her Majesty. The sky was always dark, and the black fog was always floating. Although the palace of the Demon Palace was brightly colored, with golden tiles and red walls, it still gave off a decadent aura in the darkness. Why did you choose such a place to be the demon's habitat? One day, Ning Xuema asked this question while she was wandering. Such a gloomy tone, even if one was in a good mood, it would still be affected and bleak, okay? It made people want to go crazy. The demon chi here is dense, it's a suitable hotbed for demon cultivation. They were most comfortable here. In addition, the barrier formed by the devil chi was a bone-corroding poison to the cultivators. Without the power of Earth grade level 6 or above, they could not enter this place. Even if they came, their kung fu would be greatly reduced. It's a great barrier against them. Shui Lan explained. Ning Xuema grunted and didn't say anything else. However, her heart sank slightly. After she came here, although she was disgusted by the gloomy atmosphere, she did not feel uncomfortable or uncomfortable. On the contrary, her martial arts had improved by leaps and bounds recently. She must be a devil now, right? It turned out that the devil world was her final destination. She had once longed for the light, but the light had never been fated with her. In the previous life, Shui Mo was the demon ancestor, and the original Ning Xuema was a secret agent who couldn't see the light of day. In this life, Ning Xuema was badly battered in the world of light, and in the end, she was beaten back into the darkness. It turned out that the darkness was her final destination. Momo, are you not feeling well? Shui Lan grasped her hand and looked at her complexion. Her complexion had been pale. No. Ning Xuema replied with 2 words, let's go. She didn't withdraw her hand. The 2 people walked side by side. Shui Lan was somewhat gratified. These days, Ning Xuema had been very homebody, almost staying in the palace and not coming out. Chapter 1344. Occasionally, they would go out for a walk in the garden. It was rare for her to be in the mood to tour the entire demon realm, so he would naturally accompany her. The only thing that worried him was that Ning Xuema had made this request too suddenly, and he had casually agreed to it before coming out with her. They hadn't had time to clear the area. Slow down, I'm going to kill you. Just kill me. A series of ambiguous sounds came from the corner in front of them, and they could vaguely see 3 white bodies entangled there. This was the road to the main palace, but they didn't expect to see demons performing hot pa-pa-pa on the side of the road, and it was a 3P. Ning Xuema's footsteps paused, and Shui Lan secretly clenched his fists. He reached out to grab Ning Xuema's hand and said, Momo, let's go another way. Ning Xuema didn't say anything. She came out to relax, not to watch a 3P. Moreover, she was traumatized by the act of pa-pa-pa, and didn't want to see it again. She turned around and went back with Shui Lan. What she didn't expect was that the demons in the demon realm were so open, and she actually encountered a 10P on the way back. The 3P just now was a woman and 2 men, and now the 10P was 8 women and 2 men. The 8 women were kneeling in a circle, and the 2 men were surrounding them. The scene was so filthy that it made people want to poke their eyes out. Bastards! There were such scenes in front of and behind them, and Shui Lan was furious. Couldn't they just take a stroll? Couldn't this group of bastards restrain themselves a little? If they wanted to have fun, they should have gone into the house. Why did they have to do it in the grass on both sides of the road? Get up, all of you! Shui Lan shouted, successfully startling those wild mandarin ducks who were messing around. The few of them were unhappy that their fun was interrupted, but the one who came out to stop them was their demon emperor, so they naturally didn't dare to get angry. Fortunately, they put on their clothes very quickly, and after getting dressed, they all ran over to greet him. Shuailan felt that he had lost a lot of face. He only said one word, "Scram." Thus, the group of demons dispersed. Before they left, they gave Shuailan a puzzled look. They didn't understand why he was so angry today. Wasn't it just fun when everyone was bored? Didn't he usually not care? "Momo, let's go back. You take a rest first, I'll accompany you to walk around later." He had to clear the place properly. Ning Shuama's eyes were pitch black, making it impossible to see her emotions. She shook her head. "If you're tired, you can go back first. I'll stroll around a bit more." What she wanted to see was the original state of the demon world, not something that had been arranged by someone else. Shuailan didn't understand what she was thinking, but he couldn't leave her alone. Although he complained in his heart, he still decided to accompany her. "Momo, I'm afraid that you'll be tired." "Okay, let's continue to walk around." The two of them walked forward again. In order to avoid the previous embarrassment, Shuailan deliberately slowed down a step. Then, he took out a pure black voice-transmitting talisman and was about to call one of his confidants over to ask him to send someone to clear the place in front. Ning Shuama suddenly appeared beside him and asked, "What are you doing?" Shuailan was shocked. Ning Shuama came and went so suddenly that he didn't even notice that she was beside him. Ning Shuama raised her hand and took away the voice-transmitting talisman that he had just connected. She casually cut off the call and said lightly, "You don't have to be so deliberate." Then, she walked forward. It seemed that she wanted to see the real devil world. Shuailan felt a headache coming on. Chapter 1345. Before Shuai-Mo met Shuailan in her previous life, she was almost always sealed away by the demon ancestor in a special place in the demon palace to cultivate. She rarely saw the real scenery of the demon world. Later, when she became the successor of the demon ancestor, she had more time to cultivate and less time to play. In order to create a sense of mystery, the demon ancestor almost didn't let her have too much contact with the other demons. Later, when Shuailan came to her side, he took care of everything for her. He cleared away those messy things early on and didn't let her see them at all. Therefore, although Shuai-Mo grew up in the demon world, she still didn't know much about the real demon world. But in this life, Ning Shuama's memories of her previous life had been artificially modified by Shuailan. Many things were removed, added, and deleted. They were no longer the original memories of Shuai-Mo. The demons of the demon world had always been so casual. They had all kinds of ways to find fun. Many of them were unimaginable, but they were also where their fun lay. After he rebuilt the demon world, he gathered the demons with great difficulty. Naturally, he couldn't forbid them from having fun. Occasionally, in order to make them do things to their heart's content, he even used this as a reward. He subconsciously didn't want Ning Shuama to see these dark things, but now they were directly presented in front of her eyes. What would her reaction be after seeing these? Shuailan was apprehensive. He felt that this walk was the most stressful one he had ever walked. Demons acted without restraint. Along the way, the two scared away a few pairs of wild lovebirds. They even saw a pair of abusers. The one being abused was a human girl, and the one abusing her was a demon general. When they saw it, the human girl's whole body was already so bruised that it was impossible to see. She only had one last breath left. After the demon general saw Shuailan, he didn't feel ashamed. He casually slapped the human girl to death, put on his robe, and saluted the two. He probably hadn't obtained true satisfaction. After saluting, his eyes couldn't help but stare at Ning Shuama. The undisguised lust in his eyes could not be concealed. Shuailan was infuriated. Just as he was about to teach this demon general a lesson, Ning Shuama beside him suddenly flashed. "Ah!" A miserable shriek tore through the night sky. The demon general's eyes were pierced by a sharp object. Blood flowed out, and he was in so much pain that he almost rolled on the ground. Ning Xuema casually threw away the branch in her hand and said indifferently, "I don't think you should live in this world anymore." She didn't even look at the blind devil general and continued to walk forward. The devil general did not expect to receive such a cruel punishment. In his shock and anger, he forgot about his seniority. He raised his hand and a large rock on the ground flew into his hand. He then waved it forcefully. "What are you pretending to be serious about?" His kung fu was pretty good. Even if he was blind, he could still determine Ning Xuema's location. The huge rock whizzed towards Ning Xuema. Shui Lan's expression changed. With a wave of his sleeve, the huge rock suddenly turned around and slammed into the demon general's face. This time, not only did the demon general lose his eyes, his entire face was gone as well. He became a pile of meat paste on the spot. Not far away, the other demon generals who had just rushed over could not help but be stunned. 7 or 8 pairs of eyes looked at Shui Lan. Shui Lan's voice was as cold as ice. "If anyone dares to disrespect Miss Ning again, they will end up like this person." All the demon generals. Chapter 1346. Originally, it was just a stroll to relieve boredom, but because of this small episode, it became somewhat heavy. Ning Xuema continued to move forward, but she was even more silent. Shui Lan was also somewhat dispirited. He was afraid that Ning Xuema would see something even more unbearable, so he suggested to go back. This time, Ning Xuema did not object. The two people had just turned around when they heard the faint cry of a child in front of them. The cry was mournful and startling. "Mother, I want to find Mother, Wuwa." Ning Xuema's body stiffened. This child's cry was quite similar to Hong Ti's. Her figure rose and flew forward. Shui Lan was unable to hold her back. His expression changed, and he could only follow. 8 devil generals were currently sitting around 2 large tables, drinking wine and eating meat. Their wine was actually normal wine, but the dishes, after Ning Xuema saw the dishes clearly, her stomach immediately churned. Hearts. Still beating hearts, steamed beauties, and several white and chubby children were lying dead on the side. The most shocking thing was the dish in the middle of the table. A child's head was shaved and imprisoned in the round hole in the middle of the table, twitching. His skull was already delicious. "It's really too delicious." All the devils praised. After eating 2 mouthfuls, they seemed to feel that the atmosphere was not right. They suddenly turned around and saw Shui Lan and Shui Lan standing not far away. After staring blankly for a moment, they immediately stepped forward and saluted. One of the devil generals invited Shui Lan, "Your Majesty Demon Emperor, do you want to taste this? The goods we got this time are very good. The taste is also better than last time." Shui Lan simply wanted to cover the devil general's mouth. He could not help but look at Ning Xuema beside him. Ning Xuema's face was deathly pale. She tightly pursed her lips and did not say anything. She just fiercely waved her sleeve, and a sharp wind directly attacked the dying child, giving him a release. All the demon generals were stunned, and one of them was more dazed. We can't kill him. It's better to eat him alive." "Shut up." Shui Lan shouted, successfully making the devil general choke. Ning Xuema had already turned around and left quickly, leaving behind Shui Lan, who had lost his composure. A moment later, he hurriedly followed. "Momo, they've suffered countless losses from humans, so they're venting their anger on humans. Think about it, don't humans treat other species the same way? I'll eat the monkey's brain alive, cook the duck's feet alive, pour the donkey's meat alive." They had already returned to Ning Xuemo's sleeping quarters. Shui Lan saw that Ning Xuemo's face was too pale, so he couldn't help but share this knowledge with her. "Get out. Let me be alone." Ning Xuemo spoke more this time, but it was to drive him away. Shui Lan's expression darkened, and he sighed. "Momo, don't worry, I won't let you see this again in the future." He would clear the places she would pass in advance. Ning Xuemo's response was to slam the door shut. The door almost hit Shui Lan's nose. Ning Xuemo slowly sat down on the chair and closed her eyes slightly. Although she was betrayed by Shinjiuli, hated him to the bone, and even had thoughts of becoming a demon, she had been living for many years. A human's thinking was deeply ingrained, and it wasn't so easy to destroy. Her concept of good and evil was still there, but after seeing the life of a real demon, she had a feeling that her three views were about to collapse. She closed the door in the hall and thought for a night. The next day, she finally opened the door. Shui Lan, who had been anxious for a night, was guarding outside the door. When he saw her open the door, he immediately stepped forward. "Momo." Chapter 1347. Ning Xuemo's eyes were dark, and the expression on her face was cold as if she had let go of something. "Shui Lan, do you really want me to stay in the demon world? Do you really want me to be the demon emperor?" Shui Lan was stunned, but he nodded without hesitation. "That's right. Momo, you're the demon ancestor, and the demon world is your home base." "Shui Lan, I don't care what Shui Emo was like in the previous life, but in this life, I'm Ning Xuemo. Not anyone else, you better remember this." Ning Xuemo's eyes shone like cold stars. "Okay." Shui Lan agreed. "I don't care how Shui Emo stayed in the demon world in the previous life, but I have my own set of rules. If I want to be the demon emperor, I have to change some of the rules of the demon world." Ning Xuemo put forward her own conditions. Shui Lan's heart jumped. Since he rebuilt the demon world, all the rules were the same as before, and he never thought of changing them. He built the demon world for Shui Emo's return, so if she wants to change them, then change them. She had been lifeless for so long, and it was rare to see her pull herself together again. "Okay." Shui Lan simply replied with a word. Ning Xuemo's gaze turned to Shui Lan, and her eyes were slightly complicated. Shui Lan was really good to her, regardless of the cost. He knew that her reform would probably be a big change of blood for the demon world, and the pressure he would have to bear would be very, very big. Shui Lan was extremely intelligent, and he should have understood this point long ago. However, he still said, "Okay," without hesitation, as if as long as she nodded, whether it was climbing a mountain of blades or diving into a sea of fire, he could charge in without frowning, on the heavenly sound peak. The setting sun melted the gold, and the rosy clouds burned continuously. Another day had passed. Yellow Jing and stood on the peak, anxiously looking at the snow-white pagoda floating in the sea of clouds. How long will Master be in seclusion? Does he know that the outside world has already undergone earth-shaking changes? There are many urgent matters that need to be reported to him. Yellow Jing and didn't know what happened between Shinjiuli and Ning Xuemo. He only knew that the atmosphere between his junior sister and master was a bit strange, because he, as a junior, couldn't casually ask about his master's affairs, so he didn't ask about things he shouldn't know. 16 days ago, the little Qilin brought a fire phoenix to seek shelter in a hurry, as if there was a ghost chasing after it. Masters, master miss. Masters, and although the little s, the little devils its little s's didn't killed little to s to him. After all, masters is, and he used her masters you master Yellow Jing, and also knew that Kirin was very favored, and could freely enter and leave Heavenly Sound Peak, so he first asked for his master's permission. Shinjuli only said one word, permitted. Thus, he sent the two up, and they didn't come down again. He didn't know if they'd seen his junior sister or not. After that, Shinjuli transmitted a message to him, telling him not to let anyone step into Heavenly Sound Peak for 3 days. He also ordered him to prepare the festive wedding items. He only had 3 words for these items: the best. He didn't know what his master was planning, but he still prepared everything according to his master's orders. He was just waiting for his master's order to decorate the wedding hall. Chapter 1348. However, he hadn't expected that 3 days later, Shinjuli would enter seclusion, and his junior sister's whereabouts were still unknown. While he was confused, a disciple at the foot of the mountain who had been paying attention to the demon world sent a shocking piece of news. His junior sister, Ning Xuemo, had gone to the demon world and was now with Shuailan, Yellow Jing, and was the kind of person who wouldn't change his expression even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. He had experienced many storms in his life, but this news still shocked him and made him unable to recover for a long time. As he sent people to continue investigating the demon world, he used the special voice transmission talisman to contact his master. However, Shinjuli didn't seem to have any intention of picking up. He tried for 3 days, but there was still no news from his master. Yellow Jing steeled his heart and went up the mountain to take a look. He arrived outside the White Tower where Shinjuli was cultivating in seclusion, but he didn't dare to disturb him. This was because Shinjuli had previously instructed that no one was allowed to disturb him when he was cultivating in seclusion in the White Tower unless he took the initiative to contact someone. While Yellow Jing was pacing around outside, a woman's clothes fluttered up not far away. It was Fairy Yunshi, who had been visiting the Sun-Moon sect frequently recently. Fairy Yunshi's expression was somewhat solemn. After hearing about Shinjuli's situation from Yellow Jing, she took a deep breath and said loudly to the White Tower, "Dizun, Yunshi has an important matter to discuss with you." She shouted 3 times in a row, and the White Tower's doors finally opened slowly on both sides. Shinjuli walked out slowly, stepping on the sea of clouds in the void and arriving at the mountain peak. He didn't wear a mask this time, but there wasn't much expression on his face. Yellow Jing vaguely felt that his master's aura seemed to have become much colder. He hurriedly went forward to greet him. Shinjuli only nodded slightly at him, indicating for him to stand up. Then, he glanced at Yunshi. "What's the matter?" Yunshi glanced at Yellow Jing Yellow Jing was a tactful person, so he immediately tried to think of a way to avoid this. Unexpectedly, before he could say anything, Shinjuli said, "There's no harm in speaking." The meaning was naturally that Yellow Jing was not allowed to evade. Therefore, Yellow Jing stayed put and acted as a third wheel. There was a flash of sadness in Yunshi's eyes. However, she was here to bring some breaking news to Shinjuli, so she didn't care about the details. She took a deep breath and finally revealed the explosive news. Dizun, Yunshi just found out that the demon realm has a new demon monarch. It is said that it is Lady Ning. After she finished speaking, she couldn't help but stare at Shinjuli, expecting to see shock and anger on his face. However, she was finally disappointed. Shinjuli's eyes only darkened slightly, but his face was still as calm as water. He replied her with a single word, "Oh." Yunshi was speechless. She felt as if she had used all her strength to throw a punch, yet she had ended up punching a ball of clouds. This wasn't an ordinary feeling of emptiness. She opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something, but she couldn't find the words. "Is there anything else?" Shinjuli's voice was as calm as water. "No. Nothing else." "Oh, that's right. Dizun, my injuries have completely healed." She fluttered in a circle. Shinjuli nodded slightly, indicating that he understood. Then, he said something that made Yunxi's pretty face turn pale. Since there's nothing else, you can leave. Jing and see the guest out. Chapter 1349. Yunxi was speechless. She coughed and turned to ask Yellow Jing and casually, Jing and, what's going on with your junior sister? Why is she associating with demons? Yellow Jing and smiled and bowed. Jing and doesn't know. Fairy, please. Yunxi choked. She'd originally wanted to get some information out of Yellow Jing and, but she hadn't expected her to be so tight-lipped. She asked a few more questions, and Yellow Jing and answered politely. However, every word was just a formality, and she didn't reveal any gossip. Yunxi had no choice but to leave. She just turned around when Yellow Jing and suddenly thought of something. Oh right, I forgot something. Some of your things are still with me. I'm returning them now. Fairy, please check and see if you've missed anything. My master said that there can't be the slightest oversight. He took out some miscellaneous items from his storage bag. They were all things Yunxi had used when she was recuperating, such as an ivory comb, a water chestnut mirror, a powder box, a crystal hairpin. Yunxi's face turned green and white. She forced a smile, put away those things, and turned around to leave. Yellow Jing and bowed and sent her off. Her etiquette was extremely thorough, but her eyes flashed with disdain as she watched her leave. It was said that this fairy had been seriously injured while helping her master retrieve something. Her master had made an exception and allowed her to stay at Tianyin Peak. He'd even built a small building for her and instructed Yellow Jing and to send 2 female disciples to take care of her daily needs. When her master was at the peak, this fairy looked so weak that she could faint at any moment. When her master wasn't at the peak, she liked to wander around. She'd even gone to the side hall where her junior sister lived and bought a bed of the same style. Later, her master had healed her arm and ordered her to leave. She'd left, but she'd left behind a pile of things in that small building. She hadn't taken any of her daily necessities with her. It was obvious that she wanted to come back and live there again. Her feelings for her master were clearly displayed on her face, so Yellow Jing and couldn't ignore it. A few days ago, when Shinjiuli had Yellow Jing and prepare the wedding items, Yellow Jing and was still muttering in her heart, thinking that her master, this 1,000-year-old iron tree, was finally going to bloom, but she didn't know who he wanted to marry. She thought about all the women her master knew who were slightly closer to her and thought that Fairy Yunxi had finally been chosen. Looking at it now, that was obviously not the case. Then who did master prepare it for? Could it be, it was little junior sister? Yellow Jing and slapped this thought back to her mind and turned to go to the main hall where her master lived. What do you have to report? Just say it. This was the first thing Shinjiuli said when he saw Yellow Jing and Yellow Jing and didn't dare to be long-winded, only reporting everything one by one. For example, there had been strange movements in the Devil Realm recently. People often went missing in several cities near the Devil Realm, and most of them were children. The Sun Moon sect and a few other sects had joined forces to set up surveillance in those cities and caught 2 demons. From them, they learned that the Devil Realm and the Demon Realm had joined forces, and their master was the Demon Emperor. The Demon Emperor turned out to be Shuilan, and there seemed to be some changes recently. He was going to give up his position to a woman by his side, and that woman's name was Ning Shuimo. Yellow Jing and secretly checked her master's expression as she reported. Shinjiuli's eyelashes were lowered, and no expression could be seen. He only said, continue. Chapter 1350. Yellow Jing and clenched her teeth. The other sects are furious, and there are already several sect masters who have sent people to the Sun Moon sect to demand an explanation. Master, is that girl really junior sister? So what if she is, and so what if she isn't? Shinjuli's tone was cold. Yellow Jing and was moved. Is she really Junior Sister? Junior Sister is definitely not a demon. If she went to the demon world, did Master send her to be a spy? Shinjuli didn't answer, and slowly got up. Pass down my verbal order, Ning Shuama is no longer my disciple. From today onwards, I will sever my master-disciple relationship with her. Yellow Jing and turned pale with fright and knelt down. Master, you want to expel her from the sect? Shinjuli asked back, did I say I would expel her from the sect? Yellow Jing and seemed to have fallen into a fog. Then Master's meaning is. It's the literal meaning, go. Shinjuli ordered her to leave. Yellow Jing and could only bid farewell and leave, walking while comprehending the venerable emperor's spirit. After thinking for a while, she suddenly understood. Master's meaning was that Ning Shuama was no longer the venerable emperor's disciple, but she was still a disciple of the Sun Moon sect. It seemed that Junior Sister was indeed a spy sent by Master to the demon world, but it was inconvenient for Master to say it. However, Master's verbal order had to be spread throughout the world, or else it would be very unsafe for Junior Sister to be a spy there, and it would be easy for her to be criticized by the people of the demon world. Once this verbal order was spread, Junior Sister's position in the demon world would be stable. But the other sects wouldn't let her go, and when the time came, there would be a rain of blood. It seemed that he still had to make arrangements to secretly send people to protect Junior Sister's safety, and not let others bully her. Otherwise, he, Yellow Jing, would lose face. How should this verbal order be passed down so that the other sects wouldn't dare to act rashly? Yellow Jing understood the venerable emperor's spirit, and began to ponder the most important question. As expected of someone who had led the Sun Moon sect for many years, he wasn't an ordinary deep-fried dough stick. After thinking for a long time, he finally thought of something. His eyes lit up, and he hurriedly went down to pass on the ancestors' instructions. Shinjuli stayed in the side chamber where Ning Shuama was for a full 6 hours. After 6 hours, he came out and summoned Yili Jing again. He said faintly, clean up this side chamber. Don't leave anything behind. He turned and left. Yellow Jing stared blankly. The ancestor's order was the same as what he'd said to Yunqi back then, clean up everything in the building. Now that Yunqi's small building had been demolished by the ancestor, could this side hall be demolished as well? In that case, where would Junior Martial Sister Shuama stay after she returned? Yellow Jing walked around the side chamber and found that the things here were truly lacking. She couldn't help but sigh. When Ning Shuama went missing for 10 years, everyone thought that she had been completely killed. They were afraid that their master would think of her when he returned, so they followed Wu Mo's instructions and cleaned up everything that belonged to Ning Shuama. Later, when Ning Shuama returned, because she came and went in a hurry, she didn't leave many things in this side chamber. There were only toiletries, a few sets of clothes, a few beaded flowers, and a few pieces of jewelry. Now, all these things were left alone, giving people a sense of desolation for no reason. Yellow Jing tidied up all these things and placed them in a suitable place. He was prepared to return them to Ning Shuama when she returned victorious. In order to eliminate the wariness of the Devil Realm's demons towards Junior Martial Sister, Master really put in a lot of effort. However, what would Junior Martial Sister's reaction be when she heard that Master had severed their master-disciple relationship? Chapter 1351. In order to eliminate the demon's wariness towards Junior Sister, Master really put in a lot of effort. He understood. Thus, Yellow Jing added an extra clause to the original order, hoping to achieve the best result. Suddenly, an explosive piece of news spread in the not-so-peaceful Jianghu. Because Ning Shuama was willing to degenerate into a demon, the ancestor personally gave a verbal order to sever his master-disciple relationship with his disciple, Ning Xuemo. From now on, he would no longer recognize her as his disciple. He also wanted to personally clean up the sect, and no other sect was allowed to interfere. Ning Xuemo's residence, Snow Frost Hall, was also to be demolished and used for other purposes. The ancestors' every move was like a wind vane on this continent. Even if he sneezed, the people of this continent would analyze it with relish for a month, let alone when he gave such an order. Immediately, the pot exploded. This news was like sitting on a rocket, quickly spreading to every corner of the continent. Even the furthest rabbits heard about it. Not to mention the other sects that had been paying attention to the Sun-Moon sects movements. The leaders of these sects were originally discussing how to get rid of the demons and protect the righteous path. They were discussing how to jointly write a petition to the ancestor for the sake of righteousness and justice. They didn't expect to hear this news. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, praising the ancestor in their hearts. As expected of the ancestor, he was both courageous and responsible. He didn't protect his own, and was willing to put righteousness before righteousness to get rid of evil for the people. However, because of the ancestor's verbal order, those righteous sects that were preparing to assassinate Ning Xuemo didn't dare to act rashly. If the ancestor wanted to clean up the sect himself, who would dare to interfere? It wasn't like they didn't want to live anymore. Thus, some of the assassination attempts against Ning Xuemo were silently stopped before they could even begin. The Jianghu, which had been surging with undercurrents, once again regained its calm. The demon realm, which had been eyeing the Sun-Moon sect covetously, naturally also heard this news. Of course, it also quickly reached Ning Xuemo's ears. When Ning Xuemo first heard this news, it was at dusk in the afternoon. She and Shuailan were taking a walk in the garden. She inadvertently heard the two demonesses talking about this gossip. I heard that the sovereign of the Sun-Moon sect has ordered Lady Ning to be expelled from the sect. I heard about it too. It is said that the ancestor is going to personally hunt her down and destroy the side palace she used to live in. It seems like the ancestor is serious this time. Of course it's true. Have you heard that Dizun once accepted a female disciple called Yiqingwan? Later, for some unknown reason, she was expelled from the sect. It seems that the ancestor still gives Yiqingwan face. At the very least, he didn't hunt her down and let her live a comfortable life. He also turns a blind eye to some of her actions. But he doesn't give Miss Ning any face at all. It should be because Miss Ning wants to join our demon and devil realms, right? Although the venerable sovereign usually doesn't care about the affairs of the three realms, he is still an immortal after all. He still has his bottom line. Don't you think it's strange? The ancestor only accepted 2 female disciples. I didn't expect that both of them would be expelled one after the other. It seems that the ancestor was destined not to have female disciples. It's just that the ancestor is too powerful and too dazzling. Any woman would like him. And his 2 female disciples are as beautiful as flowers and jade. It's inevitable that they would have some thoughts about their master. And the ancestor wouldn't do such a dirty thing. Naturally, they were expelled from the sect. Chapter 1352. What you said is wrong. Yiqingwan was expelled because she had dirty thoughts about Dizun. It's not like that on our side. She entered the devil realm because she liked our demon emperor. That's why she was expelled by the ancestor. Oh right, I heard that Dizun actually treated her very special and made many exceptions for her. Could it be that Dizun really likes her? Impossible. Dizun has never liked women. What's that saying? Everything is empty. Yes, everything is empty. Some things are hard to say. Alas, this woman is really a disaster. Not only did she hook up with our demon king, but she also has an unclear relationship with Dizun. I'm afraid that Dizun will harm our demon world because of this. That would be troublesome. Yes, a woman who looks like a flower vase is sitting on our demon king's seat. She only relies on her good skills in bed to make our Lord Shui fall head over heels for her. Haha, maybe she and her master also have such an affair. These two witches were the daughters of the demon race's ministers. They were sent to the demon palace by their father with the intention of giving them to Shuilan as concubines. Shuilan didn't accept them, so these two witches shamelessly stayed in the palace and worked as maids. They tried every possible means to win Shuilan's attention. Shuilan's thoughts were all on Ning Shuima, which made them feel uncomfortable. They had already made up a lot of bad things about Ning Shuima in their hearts. Now that they got such a piece of gossip, they were naturally very excited. They casually found a big stone in this big garden and thought that it was quite secretive, so they began to gossip. Not a single word left out was heard by Shuilan and Ning Shuima, who were passing by nearby. When Shuilan heard the first sentence, he frowned and opened his mouth to stop them. Unexpectedly, Ning Shuima waved her hand, indicating that he shouldn't be alarmed. She lifted her skirt and leisurely sat on a big stone nearby to listen. Shuilan had no choice but to let her be and sat beside her. In fact, Shuilan had long heard rumors about Shinjiuli and Ning Shuima severing their master-disciple relationship. He was afraid that Ning Shuima would be upset, so he didn't dare to tell her. He had been thinking about how to tell her tactfully. Now, these two witches could be considered to have helped him. He had been paying attention to Ning Shuima's reaction, but Ning Shuima had been listening with a smile on her face. She had been twirling a red spider lily in her hand, and her face had been very calm. This news didn't seem to have affected her too much. He didn't know if she had really let go or if she was just pretending to be strong. When he heard the words Ning Shuima likes our demon emperor, Shuilan's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but look at Ning Shuima again. Ning Shuima's lips twitched again, but she still didn't show any expression. After the two witches finished gossiping, they came out with satisfaction. When they raised their heads, they suddenly saw the two people who were sitting on a big rock. They were shocked and looked at each other. Their faces turned red, and they pursed their lips. Then, they knelt down. "Your Majesty the Demon Emperor." Shuilan's handsome face turned cold. "Gossiping about your master behind his back is a crime punishable by death." After he finished speaking, he glanced at Ning Shuima. He knew that she didn't kill people easily. With her personality, these two witches gossiped about their master. She would probably just reprimand them. However, Ning Shuima looked at the two witches with a smile. She didn't have any intention to interrupt. The two witches thought that their father was more favored in front of Shuilan, so they weren't afraid at this time. They even thought that this was an opportunity to attract Shuilan's attention, so they immediately apologized to him coquettishly. Their voices were sweet, and their eyes were watery. Chapter 1353. Shuilan simply wanted to slap these two to death. He glanced at Ning Shuima. Ning Shuima looked at him with a slight smile, as if she was watching a show, as if she wanted to see what he was going to do. Shuilan's heart sank. Although Ning Shuima promised him to be the demon emperor and proposed some reform plans, because her prestige was not high, she could not completely implement them. Every time he gave an order, they would only be willing to do it. He paused for a moment, then continued to reprimand, but his words revealed that he would only spare them if Ning Shuima agreed. Fortunately, one of the two witches was a little smarter, and finally remembered to beg Ning Shuima. Because she was angry, this apology was not sincere at all, and looked forced. Ning Shuima was still sitting there, holding her chin with her hand and smiling gently. "You guys are very happy gossiping about me. Shuilan, I seem to be the king of the demon world now, but it seems that they don't take me seriously." Shuilan originally had the idea of killing these two witches, but after hearing Ning Shuima's words, he immediately understood. He smiled slightly. Momo, it's my negligence, I will let them remember who their king is. He flicked his finger, and the two witches were tied up there. Then, he ordered people to ring the assembly bell, in the demon race's conference hall. All the titled demon subjects were divided into two sides. Two demon generals were kneeling there, and kneeling beside them were their daughters, the two talkative witches. Ning Xuema sat on the demon head seat this time, and Shui Lan sat on the seat slightly below her. Those two demon generals were very capable, and they were very loyal to Shui Lan. They had contributed a lot to Shui Lan's success in stabilizing his position as the demon emperor. It was just that they were too unrestrained in their work. Relying on the fact that Shui Lan usually treated them with special respect, they didn't put anyone in their eyes. This time, their daughter had gotten into trouble, but they didn't take it to heart. After Shui Lan coldly ordered the two witches to confess their crimes, they went to Ning Xuema and said that they were just children who didn't know anything and spoke nonsense. They asked Her Majesty, the Demon Emperor, to be magnanimous and not take it to heart. These kinds of words were meant to downplay this matter and let it pass. The other demon general was even more straightforward as he finally said, "The two of you, quickly kowtow and apologize to Lord Demon Emperor. Lord Demon Emperor is magnanimous and won't bicker with you." As expected, the two women unwillingly kowtowed to Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema raised her hand, and the two women were stopped by an invisible force. She smiled faintly and finally said, "Without rules, nothing can be accomplished. I wonder, according to the law of the demon realm, what is the punishment for a subject openly discussing the rights and wrongs of an emperor?" When she said this, everyone's heart skipped a beat. In fact, the laws of the demon realm were very strict. If these two women used such words to discuss Shui Lan, they would be sentenced to having their tongues cut out, and then thrown into the demon realm's Heishui River to be burned to death. The two demon generals probably didn't expect that although Ning Xuema had become the demon emperor, she didn't care about anything in the past few days, would actually ask such a question. Their expressions changed slightly. They couldn't help but raise their heads and see Ning Xuema sitting there. Although there was a faint smile on her charming face, the bottom of her eyes was cold. She clearly didn't do anything, but the aura around her was even stronger than Shui Lan's. That oppressive aura made the two experienced demon generals anxious. Their faces turned green and white, and they didn't dare to answer. Chapter 1354. Shui Lan rubbed his chin as a hint of relief flashed through his eyes. Even in his previous life, his Momo did not have such a strong aura. It seemed that after being dispirited for so long, she was finally going to recover. Her Majesty the Demon King is asking you a question. Are you afraid or disdainful to answer? Shui Lan asked as he stared at the two of them. The smile on his face had also turned cold. The two demons were also old foxes who had been in the Jianghu for a long time. Now that things had developed to this point, the two of them understood that the new Demon King was using them as bait to establish her might. These two witches were blind and had bumped into the muzzle of the gun. At this point, they could no longer protect their daughter. Otherwise, they would be implicated and punished as well. The two demons did not have a deep relationship with their daughter to begin with. At this time, they naturally chose to abandon the rook to protect the king. They immediately bowed respectfully to Ning Xuema. "Your Majesty, it is our fault for not teaching our daughter properly and offending your Majesty's might. We will act according to the laws of the demon race and punish the two of them severely." The two witches who were still unconcerned and rolled their eyes at Ning Xuema earlier were dragged away. When they were dragged away, they wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. They desperately begged in the direction where Ning Xuema was sitting. This time, they were sincere and did not add any lies. Unfortunately, it was already too late. This small episode passed just like that. This show of killing the chicken to scare the monkey finally made the demons understand who was the real master of the demon realm. They also understood that this delicate-looking little girl was not to be trifled with. Once they offended her, even the heavenly king would be punished. Thus, the demons became much more obedient. They were more respectful towards Ning Xuema and no longer treated her as a dispensable puppet. Ning Xuema was also strange. She still did things her own way. Although she was the demon king, she was still like before. Every day, she spent more time cultivating and less time coming out. Over time, the demons in the demon realm also knew a rule. This demon king did not like to care about the matters of the demon realm. Usually, as long as they did not provoke her, they could still live their lives peacefully. The one who was truly in charge was still Shuailan. Thus, the devil assembly regained their joy. Although the demon realm was rich in demon chi, it was extremely scarce in resources. Therefore, the demons basically had to go out and steal for food and clothing. They were particular about the principle of taking things. Killing and arson were easier and more common than eating cabbage. This naturally attracted the pursuit of human cultivators. Because the devil realm was in decline now, the devil realm was often chased by the other party when they were outside. There were many people who lost their lives for a nice robe or a jar of good wine. Although the demonic world was called the demonic world, the demonic world's demonic world's demonic world's demonic world's demonic world was still rather miserable. The demons lived a life where there was no tomorrow, so they muddled along. Generally, they held the attitude that if there was wine today, they would drink in the morning, and if there was no wine tomorrow, they would be worn out. It was completely different from the demons of the past. After Ning Xuema ascended to the position of the demon king, although she did not care much, she occasionally issued orders to reform some of the demons' shortcomings. At first, the demons could not accept it, but later on, they found that once it was implemented, there were actually many benefits. For example, the devil realm was rich in a kind of obsidian. This kind of stone could be sold for a lot of money in the human realm. However, the demons guarded this treasure mountain but could not sell it. Because most of the demons had demon chi, they were easily recognized by human cultivators. If they sold this kind of thing from the devil realm, it was simply a living signboard. Before a stone could be sold, it would attract the pursuit of human cultivators. Chapter 1355. The cultivators in the human world did not dare to come to the demon realm to pick up this kind of stone. This was the territory of the demons. If they came in, they would only be eaten alive by the demons. However, Ning Xuema came up with an idea. She ordered dozens of honest villagers to enter the demon realm to dig up this kind of stone. The premise was that they had to bring enough daily necessities to exchange when they came in. When the first batch of villagers carried a load full of daily necessities into the demon realm, the demons were practically drooling on both sides of the road. They were used to eating humans. When they saw these people come involuntarily, it was like seeing fat sheep walking in front of them. Because of Ning Xuema's strict order, the demons did not dare to act recklessly. Seeing that the daily necessities did not have to be snatched this time and came automatically, they still endured it. The price set by Ning Xuema was very fair. After these villagers brought the corresponding amount of obsidian out and sold it, they would definitely make a profit. After these villagers risked their lives to come in, they found that this was a lucrative job. Later on, they did not need to be invited and came on their own. Because the villagers went out to sell the obsidian, even if the cultivators saw them, they could not do anything to these villagers. Therefore, the obsidian was successfully sold, and the daily necessities sent into the demon realm naturally became more and more abundant. Ning Xuema divided these demons. Some were mining, some were inspecting the stones, some were checking the quality of daily necessities, and some were receiving goods. Gradually, a one-stop service was formed. Of course, the daily necessities obtained were still distributed according to the work they did. This was just a rough way of saying it. There was still a very detailed division of labor. It would not be described here one by one, or it would become a farming story. In short, after a series of reforms by Ning Xuemo, the demons found that they no longer had to be hunted down by human cultivators to snatch a bone. They relied on this obsidian mountain to be self-sufficient. The probability of being hunted down was greatly reduced. Ning Xuemo's management system was very refreshing for the demons, and they did get a lot of benefits. Therefore, unknowingly, their previous rejection of Ning Xuemo changed to acceptance. They were also willing to implement the rules that she had promulgated. 2 months. In just 2 months, the atmosphere in the demon realm changed greatly. People died for wealth, and birds died for food. When the basic necessities of life were well taken care of, even the demons were too lazy to go out and do evil. It was not like they had nothing better to do. What's the latest news? Shinjioli was sitting under a big tree with fiery red leaves, drawing with his brush. The maple leaves in the painting were like fire, depicting the current scenery. Opposite him, Yilu Jing and reported to him, junior sister's method is very good. It made those devils behave a lot. Recently, the devil realm has been very peaceful. The devils don't come out to do as much evil. Shinjioli gently turned a chess piece on his fingertips and nodded slightly. What about the other sects? Yes, the devil realm is so peaceful that other sects don't know what they're doing, so they try to pretend to be ordinary villagers and sneak in to take a look. However, the number of villagers who can enter the devil realm is fixed, and the devils inside have their own ways to identify them. Those sect elders who know how to disguise themselves as one of them were recognized at the entrance. If he didn't run fast enough, he would have been eaten alive by the devils. Not only that, the villager he disguised as was permanently disqualified from entering the devil realm. The other villagers are afraid that if another disciple of a cultivation sect impersonates them, they will lose the opportunity to make a fortune, so they all voluntarily leave secret signals to the devil realm's entrance control. Only when all the secret signals match can they enter. Chapter 1356. Shinjioli asked a few more questions, and Yilu Jing and reported them to him one by one. Recently, his master had been very concerned about the demon realm, so Yilu Jing and used all his information networks to inquire about the demon realm. This way, he could answer his master's daily questions. Yilu Jing and had secretly complained that his master didn't care about anything for many years. He secretly sighed. He had been the ancestor's disciple for so long, but the chances to see his master's face were pitifully few. He only saw him 3 to 5 times a year. Now he didn't complain. The frequency of him seeing his master was so high that it made people's hair stand on end. He could see him once a day. Before leaving, Yilu Jing and suddenly thought of something. Master, 2 months ago, the wedding items that Master ordered disciple to prepare, burn them. Shinjioli's short 3 words ended the fate of that batch of things. Yes. Yilu Jing and agreed. He didn't say anything else and turned to leave. After taking a few steps, he seemed to think of something again. He turned to look at his master, wanting to say something, but hesitated. Shinjioli was impatient. What is it now? Disciple heard a rumor. Little junior sister and Shuailan recently left the demon realm to play. Pa. A drop of ink fell on the rice paper. He originally wanted to draw a leaf, but it dyed a mountain rock red, like blood. Shinjioli's brush paused and casually dyed the drop of ink. Where did they go? This. I haven't found out yet. Disciple is sending people to investigate. Shinjioli didn't say anything else and continued to draw with his head bowed. Yellow Jing and saw his brush move like a dragon and finally couldn't help but say, "Master, I heard from the demon realm that their good news is near. The demons have already begun to prepare for their wedding." Shinjuli's brush paused for a moment, and a big red mark appeared on the red maple tree that was originally dense with leaves. Yellow Jing and pretended not to see the red maple tree that had been drawn out of shape and finally left. Shinjuli stared at the drawing on the stone table for a moment. The red maple tree in front of him seemed to have turned into a girl's red dress. The wind blew, and the girl's dress danced. The girl's smile was like a flower as she played the pipa. He froze for a moment. This image had suddenly appeared in his mind and then disappeared. When he wanted to grab it, it had disappeared without a trace. He understood that this should be a scene of him and Ning Xuemo together before he lost his memory. It was just an image, and there was no way to connect the two. In the past, when he lost his memory, he would never remember the past. This time, some images flashed through his mind. Although he couldn't connect them together, they were all about Ning Xuemo. 3,000 years ago, he was injured by Shui Emo, causing the death of his beloved disciple, Long Chuan, and losing half of the immortal world. Not long after he woke up from his grief, he sealed away all his memories of Shui Emo. He didn't expect that the seal would automatically split and become Wu Mo. His injuries were too severe and he needed to sleep for 10 years to recuperate. Before he fell asleep, in order to prevent himself from repeating the same mistakes, he ordered that he would sleep once every 900 years. After he woke up, he would forget all the oracles from his previous life. He slept like this again and again, and he had long forgotten why he had ordered this kind of oracles in the first place. When Wu Mo died, the memories from 3,000 years ago came back. Only then did he remember everything. That injury also left him with the problem of returning to his youth once every 18 years. He had to cultivate on the 9th peak of Heavenly Book Mountain for 3 days before he could return to normal. Because he had lost all his previous memories, he didn't know where this strange injury came from. Chapter 1357. The reason why Shui Emo was so attentive to him was because she wanted something. He already knew this, but he didn't know what she wanted. At first, he didn't care about her and was too lazy to ask, but later, he was too deep in the mud to ask. He was born as a god. Although he appeared to be indifferent, he was extremely conceited. He felt that since he had fallen in love with this little fox, then with his ability, he could also make Shui Mo fall in love with him and never return to the demon world. Shui Mo's body was special. He understood that his power would decrease if he married her. However, he relied on his high power and didn't care about the danger of temporarily turning into a human for 3 years. He wantonly made love with her, even washing her hands and making soup for her, living the life of an ordinary husband and wife with her. She often said that she didn't have a childhood, so he spent 30% of his power to build a jellyfish castle for her. He never knew that he would spoil a girl so much. He couldn't wait to bring the whole world to her, just to make her smile. He never knew that he could love someone so much that he forgot his identity as a god and did many things that were beneath his godhood. He had eyes and ears everywhere. Some things didn't need to be deliberately asked to know. Before he married Shui Mo, he knew that she was the princess of the demon world, the successor of the demon ancestor. And Shui Lan, who was injured by his palm, was her follower. The two were inseparable in the demon world. Shui Lan's red robe left a deep impression on him. Therefore, after he learned about the relationship between Shui Mo and Shui Lan, he subconsciously hated the color red. Even if he got married, he didn't want to wear a wedding robe. He thought that he would hold her hand for the rest of his life. Who would have thought that she would personally cut open his heart for another man? The more he loved her at that time, the more he was hurt after she betrayed him. He was a god. The woman who married him 3,000 years ago didn't need to go through any tribulation because even if there was one, he could easily block it. 3,000 years later, this rule was made after he was injured by Shui Yemo. He was afraid that he would fall in love with a witch in the future, so he made this rule. Witches couldn't go through the real tribulation. He had arranged everything very well, and the past 3,000 years had been peaceful and stable. But he didn't expect that 3,000 years later, she would turn into Ning Shuama and come to his side, and he fell in love with her once again. After going around in circles, the three of them bumped into each other again. This was really a sin. His fingers unconsciously tightened around the brush, and his eyelashes drooped. Suddenly, with a crack, the brush snapped and fell to the ground. The painting on the table also spontaneously combusted, turning into ashes in the blink of an eye. When the wind blew, not a single trace was left behind. These days, Shui Lan brought Ning Shuama to many beautiful places in different spacetimes. For example, the Flower Immortal Country's 10,000-li sea of flowers. The entire world was a sea of flowers. Countless beautiful flowers bloomed in a vigorous manner. Beautiful and exquisite fairies shuttled through the flowers. Countless streams of light sprinkled down, causing the flowers to glow even in the dark night. For example, the crystal sea of the Water Dream Nation was like a piece of crystal-clear jade, so clear that one could see the bottom. Ning Shuama and Shui Lan held hands and hovered above the sea. They could clearly see the beautiful and enchanting mermaids in the depths of the sea. She also went to many places and saw beautiful scenery that she had never seen before. Shui Lan could clearly feel that Ning Shuama's mood was gradually improving. Her eyes were no longer dark and gloomy, and they began to show true brilliance. Chapter 1358. Her attitude towards him was no longer so repulsive. At first, she would freeze when he held her hand, but now, she no longer rejected his embrace. Shui Lan finally understood that if he treated Ning Shuama forcefully, she would only feel disgusted and run away. He had to slowly influence her and make her willing to be with him. Somewhere, the sun slowly sank below the surface of the sea. The setting sun melted the gold, and the evening clouds merged together. Large clouds of fire burned continuously in the sky, reflecting the entire sea with a golden red color. Shui Lan and Ning Shuama were still dressed in red, and they danced vigorously in the sea breeze. Ning Shuama looked at the distant sea in a daze. Shui Lan looked at her walking beside him, and his heart was filled with an indescribable sense of satisfaction. He tilted his head and asked, "Momo, what are you thinking about?" Ning Shuama withdrew her gaze and said indifferently, "Nothing." The two of them walked on the beach for a long time, until the golden crow sank into the sea. The bright moon slowly rose from where the water met the sky, and the stars in the sky were like a plate of loose sand, slowly flowing in the sky. Shui Lan looked at Ning Shuama, and his lips curved into a smile. He said meaningfully, "Momo, isn't it wonderful to have someone accompany you and play with you?" Ning Shuama glanced at him, revealing a smile that was not a smile. "Lan Shan, what do you want to say?" Shui Lan's heart suddenly beat faster. He tried hard to maintain the expression on his face, and tried to sound as calm as possible. "Momo, I'll accompany you for a long time in the future. What do you think?" After saying this, he stared at Ning Shuama, like a child waiting for the results of an exam. Ning Shuama looked at the distant sea and the wisps of sea fog. She was silent for a long time. As time passed, Shui Lan's heart sank. Just as his heart was about to sink to the bottom of the valley, Ning Shuama turned her head with a faint smile on her lips. "You can try." Shui Lan's heart, which had fallen to rock bottom, instantly rose to heaven. He felt like he was in a dream. His eyes were astonishingly bright. He looked at Ning Shuama for a long time without saying anything. Suddenly, he somersaulted in the air and smiled like a flower. "Okay, let's give it a try." Ning Shuama looked at his bright eyes, and her heart suddenly sank. Shui Lan's feelings for her were too heavy for her to bear. When Ning Xuema saw the familiar scenery on the street, her body stiffened slightly. Why did Shui Lan bring her to the immortal nation? Looking at the exquisite carvings and paintings everywhere, countless memories uncontrollably rushed into her mind. Ning Xuema closed her eyes. When Shui Lan's eyes swept over her, she returned to her indifferent appearance. Shui Lan didn't want to come here, but he always wanted to give Ning Xuema a gift. Shinjioli had once given her a pair of ame piercers, but she had already thrown them back. Now Ning Xuema didn't even have a good weapon. If he gave her a weapon made of moonlight iron, she would definitely be very happy, right? But he didn't plan on telling Ning Xuema about this. He wanted to give her a pleasant surprise. The two of them first went to the tea house to drink a pot of fragrant tea. Then they went to the Ni Chang pavilion to buy a lot of clothes. Shui Lan was finally satisfied as he left with Ning Xuema. As long as Ning Xuema's eyes stopped on something, he would spend a lot of money to buy it. Now he added a pile of clothes. Chapter 1359. Shui Lan had never thought that other than weapons, poisons, and charms would appear in his storage space. But now, looking at these small things, he was even happier than if he had obtained a peerless weapon. This was because he had already obtained a rare treasure. Whatever else was left was not worth mentioning. He only wanted to pamper Momo. The two slowly walked out of the city. There were fewer and fewer people, and the scenery became more and more beautiful. Shui Lan brought Ning Xuema around the outskirts of the city for a long time, as if he was looking for something. After a while, he finally stopped at a place. This was a relatively spacious area facing the sun. Behind it was a lush green mountain, facing the rippling water. There were a few willow trees planted by the water, and the willow leaves gently danced on the water. On the soft green grass, cute little animals would often run by. Shui Lan raised his hand, and the little animals were forcefully thrown back into the forest. A small two-story building rose from the ground. It was exquisite and beautiful. There was a fence around the building, blocking the curious little animals outside. Shui Lan held Ning Xuema's hand and walked into the building. He smiled faintly and said, "The distant mountain is beautiful, and the nearby water is smoky. Momo, let's live here in seclusion for a while, okay?" Ning Xuema looked at the fresh and unique scenery around her and nodded. The next morning, Shui Lan disappeared. When Ning Xuema woke up, she saw a steaming hot meal and a note on the table. The note said, "Momo, I'll be back in the evening. Don't worry." Ning Xuema stared blankly at the note for a while. Suddenly, the corner of her lips curled up slightly. She sat down and began to eat. This should be the food that Shui Lan cooked. It was very delicious. Once some things became a habit, she would get used to it. She should be able to get used to it quickly. After Ning Xuema finished eating, she began to meditate and cultivate. She cultivated for an entire day. Shui Lan had been slaughtering dragons on Mount Yuehua for an entire day, but he hadn't even found a single piece of moonlight iron. He was already restless, and now he was even more upset. He wondered if Momo had stayed at home obediently. He didn't set up any barriers around the hut, nor did he restrict Ning Xuema's movements. He allowed her to come and go as she pleased. This was actually a bold test of his. He wanted to see if Momo was truly with him. That night at the seaside, Momo's response to his bold confession was a pleasant surprise. It made him feel that it was unreal. He was afraid that she was just stalling for time. Once he let his guard down, she would leave and never come back. Therefore, after Ning Xuema agreed to try it with him, he became even more frightened. He was on tenterhooks every night. The time he spent with Ning Xuema was too beautiful and dreamy, which made him feel unreal. He was afraid that when he woke up, he would wake up from his dream and become a lonely person again. This sweet fear had been tormenting him for a long time. It made his heart more and more sensitive. When it came to flirting, he was worthy of being called a veteran in the field of flowers. However, when it came to seriously pursuing a person, he really had no experience. This made him even more terrified. Even if he presented the best things to Ning Xuemo, he still felt that they were not enough. It wasn't until he accidentally saw a love story in the human world. It was written that if you love someone, you have to believe in that person. He felt that he seemed to have understood something. In order to understand love more thoroughly and understand how to pursue a person better, Shui Lan had bought countless books and read them every night by burning oil in the lamp. Chapter 1360. This situation persisted until Ning Xuemo inadvertently saw it and stopped. Because he still couldn't forget Ning Xuemo's surprised and funny expression at that time. For the first time in his life, he felt embarrassed, so he burned the small book with a wooden face. But he had already memorized the contents of the book. If he loved her, he had to believe in her. Shui Lan decided that he would try to believe in Ning Xuemo, believe that she was sincerely with him. So, he gave her enough freedom and respect. Her injuries had already healed. In a day, if she wanted to leave, she had enough opportunities to run away. She also had enough time to run to a place where he could never find her again. Would she have already taken the opportunity to leave him and run far away? Shui Lan was distracted, and his robe was almost burned by the moonlight pterosaur's flame. His eyes darkened, and he raised his hand to deal with the moonlight pterosaur. There was still no moonlight iron. Thinking that Ning Xuemo might have left him and gone to a place he didn't know, Shui Lan's mood became even more irritable. Looking at the sky, the moon was already hanging in the sky. Unable to bear it anymore, his figure flashed and turned into a red light flying towards the small house. What if Momo really left? This thought lingered in his heart, making his heart slightly tighten. As he got closer and closer to the small house, his heart became more and more tense, and his heart beat like a drum. Then he would dig 3 feet into the ground to find Ning Xuemo again, and lock her in the barrier, not letting her have the chance to leave him again. Shui Lan's eyes flashed with a red light, but as if he suddenly thought of something, his eyes darkened. He had once locked Ning Xuemo up for 10 years, and in exchange, she only hated him and fled. So he couldn't lock her up, he had to slowly reform her. Even if she left this time, he could find her and accompany her everywhere. It didn't matter if she left early. He could catch up with her and join her. Although he tried his best to comfort himself, his heart still sank when he saw the dark building without a single light. Did Momo really leave? Did she really abandon him and leave? His heart was about to sink into icy water. Lifting his feet, he stiffly approached the small building. Not in the courtyard, not in the hall, not in the training room, not in his own room. Shui Lan searched through all the rooms except for Ning Xuemo's bedroom on the 2nd floor. He slowly walked up to the 2nd floor. His footsteps were so light that there was no sound. He gently pulled open the door to Ning Xuemo's bedroom, and what greeted him was darkness. The bedding was neatly placed at the head of the bed, and there was no trace of heat. Obviously, Ning Xuemo had been gone for a long time. She must have left without hesitation after he left. No matter how well he treated her, as soon as he left for a short while, she would leave him without any reluctance, making him unable to find her again. Momo, how can you be so cruel? Shui Lan's heart ached terribly. He looked at the empty bed, and sorrow flooded him like a tide. Where should he go to find her? In a day's time, she might have already gone to another time and space. In this vast sea of people, where should he go to find her? After he found her, would she abandon him again? Shui Lan felt that all his strength had been sucked away. His body swayed, and under the moonlight, his face became even paler, almost without any blood. Chapter 1361. Shuai-Lan felt as if all his energy had been sucked out of him. His body swayed, and under the moonlight, his face became increasingly pale, almost devoid of blood. Suddenly, someone patted him on the shoulder. Startled, he quickly turned around and saw Ning Xuema's puzzled face. "Lan Shan, you're back. What are you doing standing here?" Ning Xuema had been cultivating in the practice room for a day. After that, she went out for a stroll. When she returned to her bedroom, she saw someone standing in front of her bed. She thought it was a thief and was about to take care of him when she saw that it was Shuai-Lan. "She's back. She didn't abandon him and run away." Shuai-Lan looked at her for a long time without saying anything. At that moment, he almost cried tears of joy. He pulled Ning Xuema into his arms and hugged her tightly. "Momo, I thought you. Where did you go?" Ning Xuema was caught off guard and was pulled into his arms. Her body stiffened slightly. When she heard his words, she sighed in her heart. Did Shuai-Lan think that she took the opportunity to leave? Where could she go now? Moreover, she had already promised to try it out with Shuai-Lan. She wouldn't go back on her word. Thus, Ning Xuema patted Shuai-Lan's back and said helplessly, "I just went out for a stroll. Of course I'll come back." Shuai-Lan hugged her for a long time before letting go. He raised his hand to tidy up her long hair. His eyes shone brightly. "I believe you. From now on, I'll believe every word you say. Because I love you." The atmosphere was a little ambiguous. Shuai-Lan looked at Ning Xuema in his arms as if he was looking at a lost treasure. After looking at her for a long time, the desire to kiss her grew stronger. He tried to slowly kiss her. Ning Xuema looked at Shuai-Lan's handsome face that was gradually enlarging. She closed her eyes, and her body became more and more stiff. There was a voice in her heart that wanted to run away, but her rationality reminded her that she wanted to try with Shuai-Lan. His lips were getting closer and closer to her. Shuai-Lan opened his eyes and saw the unnatural expression on Ning Xuema's face. Her body was as stiff as a block of wood. A hint of disappointment flashed across his eyes. He sighed inwardly and finally stopped. In the end, he patted her head and said in a low and hoarse voice, "Momo, rest early. Call me if you need anything." He turned around and left. After Shuai-Lan left, Ning Xuema's body slowly relaxed. She looked at Shuai-Lan's departing figure with a complicated look in her eyes. In the end, she quietly climbed onto the bed and pulled the blanket over herself to sleep. He slept all the way until dawn. When she woke up again, she was greeted by a steaming hot meal and a note. "I'll be back in the evening. Don't miss me. If you're bored, go out for a walk. Go out and relax." Ning Xuema looked at the note with a trace of doubt in her heart. Where did Shuai-Lan go? However, that doubt was just a drop in the ocean. It disappeared without a trace. After Ning Xuema finished her meal, she went downstairs to cultivate. She didn't know why, but she felt uneasy today. After meditating for less than 2 hours, she couldn't calm her heart down. She took a deep breath and decided to go out for a walk. Ning Xuema walked on the street and looked at the bustling crowd. She felt a sense of absent-mindedness, and some memories couldn't help but surge up. Unknowingly, she walked to the forge that used to be. She needed to choose a suitable weapon for herself. She couldn't always fight with her bare hands. The shop owner was still that cool young man. However, he was much friendlier this time. Chapter 1362. It was clear that he had recognized Ning Xuema. He curiously asked, "Where is the great god that accompanied you last time?" Ning Xiaoma's footsteps paused. After a while, she lightly said, "He's dead." The youth choked. Ning Xiaoma suddenly felt a bit annoyed. None of the weapons were pleasing to her eyes, so she decided to leave. The youth hurriedly opened his mouth. "Do you want to see the new weapons that I made?" Ning Xiaoma's footsteps paused and she turned around. The youth went into the room and after a while, he came out with a heavy rectangular box. The box was completely black and she did not know what material it was made of. It was so dark that it did not reflect any light at all. Ning Xiaoma suddenly felt a bit curious. She took a few steps forward and waited for the youth to open the box. The youth secretly let out a sigh of relief. He carefully opened the box. It was a pair of eye piercers. Ning Xiaoma instantly froze. She looked at the eye piercers that were flowing with colorful lights and was slightly stunned. The youth saw that her expression was a bit strange and hurriedly began to introduce, "I spent a lot of effort to make this from a whole piece of moonlight iron. It can cut through iron like mud and it can cut through hair. It is a rare treasure. Since I'm familiar with you, I can give you a discount. 80,000 crystal beads. 80,000 crystal beads for this divine weapon was really worth it." This pair of eye piercers, whether it was the pattern or the carving, it was different from the previous pair. But it was still a rare treasure. But Ning Xiaoma already had a shadow over the eye piercers. As long as she saw the eye piercers, she could not help but think of the despair and pain that she felt on the day they broke up. The eye piercers were like a thorn that deeply pierced into her heart. She could not touch it. She did not even like daggers that were similar to the eye piercers, let alone an authentic one. She did not even want to look at the eye piercers, let alone buy them. "I don't want it." She only said these two words and turned around to leave. The young blacksmith thought that she thought it was too expensive, so he shouted from behind, 50,000. 50,000, no less. Ning Xiaoma did not stop walking. Just as she was about to walk out of the armament manual, the young blacksmith ran in front of her with the pair of eye piercers. "This pair of eye piercers is destined to be with you. I've also met you twice, so I'll give it to you." The eye piercers seemed to light up, but it was only for a moment. He was actually giving it away for free. She wouldn't want it even if it was given to her for free. Ning Xiaoma looked at him and finally opened her mouth. Her tone was a little indifferent. "Sorry, I'm not interested." "Excuse me." Her expression was ice cold, and her body was surrounded by cold air. The young blacksmith was frozen in place, unable to say anything else. She walked around the young man and turned to leave. The young blacksmith was speechless. After Ning Xiaoma walked far away, he looked at the eye piercer in his hand and sighed. "It's not that I don't want to help you, but this girl really doesn't want to accept." A man in white came out from the inner room. He was wearing a wide robe with flowing cloud patterns, and his icy blue eyes were like the deepest blue sea. It was Shinjoli. The young man's hand was empty, and the pair of eye piercers was in Shinjoli's hand. He looked at the pair of eye piercers, and his eyes were dark. The conversation just now was still echoing in his mind. "Where's the great master who came with you?" "Dead." The words died without any sorrow or joy, were like a sharp sword that ruthlessly pierced through his heart. Was he already dead in her heart? Did she hate him so much now? Chapter 1363. When she mentioned it, she would just say, "dead," and deal with it. What was even more unexpected was that she would even dislike the eye piercer. The eye piercer in his hand let out a low cry, as if it was crying. It didn't expect that even if it changed into a more beautiful design, its master wouldn't like it anymore. Shinjoli watched as Ning Xiaoma walked away. His eyes moved, and in the end, his figure slowly disappeared as he quietly followed her. Ning Xuema was in a bad mood after coming out of the weapon shop. She couldn't help but think about the past. When she saw the ame piercers, her memories surged like a flood that broke through the dam. Every scene was filled with the beautiful and warm memories of the past. However, the past was the past after all. The warmth of the past was nothing more than a big joke in today's world. The emotions that were usually well hidden began to surge, giving her the urge to destroy everything. Ning Xuema strolled on the streets of the Immortal Kingdom. She looked at the exquisite pavilions on both sides and tried her best to suppress the desire to destroy. It was unknown when it started to drizzle. The passers-by were holding small umbrellas and walking in a hurry. There were fewer people like Ning Xuema leisurely strolling on the streets. Ning Xuema also bought a simple and elegant sky blue paper umbrella. She held it as she walked slowly. She strolled around and unknowingly walked onto Lover's Bridge. Looking at the same love locks on the bridge and the names on the same love locks, she curled her lips slightly, revealing a faint mocking smile. It was unknown whether she was laughing at herself or at others. Her fingers slowly slid across the bronze locks, as if she was looking for something. Suddenly, her white jade-like fingers stopped on a jade lock. Ning Xuema's fingers paused for a moment before she silently lifted the beautiful jade lock. She stared at the jade lock for a long time without a trace of emotion on her face. However, in the depths of her eyes, there were layers of ripples. Looking at the two beautiful names on the lock, Ning Xuema's hands trembled slightly. Ning Xuema, Shinjiuli. There was a heart in the middle, representing love. Hee hee. Ning Xuema stared at the jade lock absent-mindedly. She was caught off guard and fell into the trap of memories. At that time, Shinjiuli hadn't lost his memories. He brought her to the Immortal Kingdom to play and passed by Lover's Bridge. Guru, can we write our names down too? Ning Xuema bought a bronze lock and was about to carve it with a small carving knife. Shinjiuli flicked his sleeve and the lock fell into the water. You! Ning Xuema glared at him. Shinjiuli looked at her coldly and suddenly placed something in her palm. Ning Xuema opened her hand and saw a sparkling and translucent jade lock lying quietly in her palm. Shinjiuli's voice rang out beside her ear, "That one is too ugly." Ning Xuema, the Almighty was indeed the Almighty. He wanted the best for everything. She carved the names of the two people together stroke by stroke and connected them with a big heart in the middle. Ning Xuema locked the lock on the bridge and looked at the jade lock worriedly. If such a peerless jade lock was placed on this bridge, would it be stolen by someone? Shinjiuli's fingers moved slightly and the jade lock flashed with white light. It turned into a normal bronze lock. Ning Xuema looked at Shinjiuli speechlessly. Shinjiuli looked back at her with a puzzled expression. He had set up an eternal enchantment for the lock. Was there something wrong with that? Ning Xuema looked at the jade lock and found it funny. Even if the bridge collapsed, the lock would be bound to it. Chapter 1364. If the thief wanted to steal the jade, he would have to take the bridge away. Memories were like poisonous wine. At first, it was fragrant, but later, it eroded the bones and overwhelmed the soul. A drop of rain fell on the jade lock and the water droplets splashed. Ning Xuema suddenly came back to her senses. She looked at the jade lock and showed a touch of mockery. With a wave of her sleeve, the jade lock broke and fell into the rippling lake water. With a plop sound, countless fishes scattered in fright and hid in the lotus leaves one after another. Ning Xuema stood on the bridge and held an umbrella. She stood there quietly for a long time. The fishes under the bridge shuttled back and forth between the lotus leaves. The drizzle fell into the water, causing the water to ripple. The lake water rippled and could not calm down. Ning Xuema's eyes seemed to have a pool of lake water. The ripples could not be calmed down. After a while, she slowly left. Shinjioli stood under a tree and quietly looked at the figure on the bridge. The person on the bridge was wearing a red dress that fluttered in the wind. Under the sky blue paper umbrella was her long hair that was as black as ink. In the hazy drizzle, there were wisps of milky white smoke lingering around her body. She was like a fairy that had accidentally landed in the mortal world. She was so beautiful that she was ethereal. He looked at the person on the bridge for as long as she stood there. There was a dense pain in his heart that was becoming a death. He knew that this woman did not have a heart. Perhaps she did not love him. He knew that he should let go, but he could not let go. For the first time in his life, he tasted the feeling of wanting to let go but not being able to. He did not know what to do. Reason told him that they were two existences that should not have intersected. Only when they truly let go would it be beneficial for both of them. However, reason was reason. Emotion was emotion. She was like a disaster for him. He could not get over it in a short time. He did not know why he was like a little thief and secretly followed behind her. He only knew that from the moment they met again, his heart unconsciously moved closer to her and followed her footsteps, looking at her standing on the bridge for so long, his fingertips curled slightly. He subconsciously wanted to support her with an enchantment, but he resisted. Anger surged in the depths of his eyes. On the surface, she seemed to have recovered, but she had been soaked in the demon-vanquishing soup after all. The injury she had sustained was a wound to her soul. Even if this kind of injury didn't show on the surface, it was like a broken porcelain that was still intact. It couldn't withstand even the slightest breeze. An ordinary cold might be enough to take her life. Getting caught in the rain was the stupidest thing to do. If it was in the past, he might have already opened his mouth to teach her a lesson. However, he was in no position to do so now, therefore, he could only stand there, not knowing what to do. Ning Xuema finally left slowly. Shinjioli silently walked onto the bridge and stood at her previous position. She had already walked far away, her back gradually disappearing into the crowd. She was clearly dressed in bright red, but for some reason, she gave off a bleak and cold feeling. After a moment of silence, he waved his sleeve. Suddenly, there was a flash on the surface of the lake. Something broke out of the water and landed in his palm. Shinjioli opened his palm. A broken jade lock was quietly lying in his palm. The lock had long been broken and nowhere to be found. On the jade lock, there was a shocking and deep crack between the two names. It was like a clear boundary. The rain soaked his clothes and gave him a heart-piercing chill. Shinjioli's fingers clenched tightly. In that moment, countless distant memories flooded his mind, making him feel both sweet and sad. Chapter 1365. Countless yellowed images flashed by, but upon contact, they scattered like shooting stars, and not a single trace of them could be found. Shinjioli's icy blue eyes flashed with pain. He slowly touched a character on the jade lock, tracing it over and over again, Xuema. At this moment, he understood that 10 years ago, he definitely didn't take her as a disciple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed her to hang this kind of lock here, and even set up a barrier to protect it. Ning Xuema, are you still Xuemo? Did you approach me this time because you really like me? Or do you still want to get something from here? When he returned from amnesia, her excitement when she saw him again didn't seem fake. Her actions as if she liked him also didn't seem fake. But, when she approached him in the previous life, she was also so romantic and flirtatious. When she stayed by his side, she was also endlessly happy, as if she liked him to the extreme. But she turned around and stabbed him with a sword, taking his heart's blood to save another man. Ning Xuemo, are you really for me this time? Shinjioli felt that he was simply crazy. Reason told him to turn back and be saved, but he couldn't let go of his feelings. He didn't even know what to do if he followed her like this. However, since he followed her, then he would follow her first. He had always done as he pleased, and did as he pleased. There were very few opportunities to make himself feel wronged or forced. So this time, he didn't want to force himself. If he wanted to follow, then he would follow. First, he would observe, then slowly analyze his own thoughts and analyze her. After Ning Xuemo returned to the small building, her heart had already returned to its calm state. She looked outside the window. After the drizzle, all things were sprouting. Nearby, flowers bloomed layer by layer, green grass grew, and in the distance, green mountains stretched endlessly and white clouds drifted. She sat down and quietly painted. She was painting the current scenery. The sky darkened little by little. Ning Xuemo lit a lamp and boiled oil, taking the opportunity to paint an impressionistic scene. The moon hung high above the willow branches, and people met at dusk. Shinjioli sat on a tree, looking at the light in the small building not far away, looking at the red-clothed girl painting under the light. Looking at her serene and beautiful face, looking at the scene she painted taking shape bit by bit, he pulled out a jade gourd out of nowhere and drank a mouthful of wine. Ning Xuemo suddenly raised her head and glanced at the two of them. Shinjioli's body stiffened. Could it be that she had seen through him? That's impossible. He's already invisible. However, Ning Xuemo only glanced at him for a moment before lowering her head and continuing to paint. Under her brush, a large tree with luxuriant leaves was slowly taking shape, so he was here to draw trees. Shinjioli couldn't tell if he was glad or disappointed. However, the strange thing was that the big tree used as a model was clearly flourishing like spring, and its leaves were as green as jade. However, what she drew was full of withered leaves hanging from the branches. They were rustling in the breeze and looked as if they would fall at any time. Shinjioli himself was the art sage. In this world, no one understood painting better than he did. Generally, what a painter painted reflected the painter's mentality at that time. Why was her mentality so bleak now? He glanced at the painting and could feel a sense of bleakness and silence. The big tree seemed to be trying its best to pull itself together and not let the leaves fall. However, it couldn't withstand the strong autumn wind. Ning Xuemo didn't know why, but when she looked at the big tree under her brush, she was in a daze. Was this a freehand style? Chapter 1366. Originally, she thought that the big tree looked good and wanted to copy it with her brush, but in the end, she drew a withered tree. This was not the right way to draw even if she copied it. While she was in a daze, a drop of ink fell to the ground. The branch instantly became dizzy, as if it had been destroyed by something. Ning Xuemo was stunned. Then, she looked at the painting with an expressionless face and rubbed her fingers on the paper. The painting instantly turned into thousands of pieces of paper, flying all over the sky. It was like a heavy snowfall, and the ground was in a mess. Ning Xuemo stood quietly among the pieces of paper. No one knew what she was thinking. A red figure flew from the sky and landed in front of the small building. Then, he walked into the small building with light steps. He seemed to be in a good mood. It was Shuailan. Shinjioli looked at the pair of figures under the light and took another sip of wine. His icy blue eyes were like the ebb and flow of the sea. Shinjioli had become an invisible person. Every day, he silently followed behind Ning Xuemo. He used to like drinking tea, but now he liked drinking wine. The wine gourd never left his side. She stood by the water and looked at the rippling waves and the clouds in the sky. He leaned against the tree and looked at her red dress and black hair fluttering in the wind. She suddenly became obsessed with painting. When she had nothing to do, she painted the sky, the earth, the mountains, and the water. However, she did not paint people. Her paintings looked lively, but there was always a sense of loneliness that could not be hidden. She was like a flower in the wind and rain, trying hard not to wither in the autumn wind, trying hard to survive the winter. She never kept her paintings. Once she finished them, they would be destroyed. They would be directly destroyed into dust and dissipate in the air. However, he restored the paintings in a corner where she could not see them. He looked at them carefully again and again, as if he was trying to find something in them. Her painting skills were not bad and she was very talented. However, in his eyes, her paintings were still the scribbles of a primary school student. He was usually too lazy to look at such paintings, but now he could not help but restore them and keep them. He didn't know why he had to follow her all the time, but if he didn't see her for a day, his heart would feel empty. She seemed to have returned to normal. There was a smile on her face, and she was talking and laughing with Shuailan. On the surface, there was nothing wrong with her. It was only in the painting that he could see a hint of her emotions. Ning Xiuma's days were very dull. She would either practice martial arts or go out for a walk. She also got along very well with Shuailan. Every day, Shuailan would leave early and return late, while she would stay here leisurely, cultivating, painting, and strolling. They looked like an ordinary couple living in seclusion in the suburbs. Occasionally, she would go out with Shuailan. When they met passers-by, they would think that they were husband and wife and praise them for being a perfect couple. Often, Shuailan would smile like a blooming flower. As for Ning Xiuma, she only smiled and didn't refute anything. Perhaps, she was destined to be together with Shuailan. After going around in circles for so long, she was just back to where she started. Didn't she like Shuailan in her previous life? Then, she would definitely like him in this life too. It was impossible for her to love him so deeply in her previous life, but not feel anything in this life. If she did not meet Shinjuli first and fell in love with him first, perhaps she would have slowly fallen in love with Shuailan, or it could be said that she liked Shinjuli in this life because she owed him in her previous life. She felt guilty, so God wanted to punish her and let her have a taste of being betrayed by the person she loved. Now that she had tasted it, she also woke up from her dream. Chapter 1367. It was time to return to the starting point. People weren't afraid of returning to the starting point, but they were afraid of not being able to find the right direction. They were afraid of being completely lost on the wrong path. Therefore, she should be glad that she hadn't gone too far on the wrong path. Although she had almost lost a layer of skin in the swamp of the wrong path, it was fortunate that she had returned to the starting point alive, wasn't it? That must be it. That must be it. She had to walk out of it. She had to walk out of it slowly. She wanted to be her former self. She wanted to create a new world for herself in this world. Whether she was an immortal or a devil, it was just a matter of a thought. As long as she kept her original heart, why would she care if she was an immortal or a devil? Everyone said that the best way to walk out of a relationship was to walk into another one. Therefore, she wanted to try with Shuailan. Maybe she could really find the right feelings again. Everything was still unknown, wasn't it? After trying, she might not be able to love again. However, if she didn't try, she would never know if she could love again. Doing this might be unfair to Shuailan. Therefore, even if she couldn't love him in the future, she would treat him as a friend and compensate him in other ways. Perhaps after a few years, she and Shuailan would really fall in love and get married. It would be a beautiful story. At that time, if she heard any news about Shinjuli, she might really be able to laugh it off. Even if the news was that he and Yunshi were married, even if he really came to kill her, she would be able to have a real showdown with him. In this world, she could survive without anyone. The earth would continue to rotate regardless of who left. Without Shinjuli, she could still live a wonderful life. She had to live a wonderful life and not let others see her as a joke. Some people weren't born to help each other in times of need. They should forget about each other. She hypnotized herself like this almost every day and finally started to pull herself together. When she first arrived in the devil world, she always felt like there was a bomb in her chest that could explode at any time. She wanted to blow up Tianyin Peak and take everything in the world down with her. She was full of negative energy. She tried her best to suppress it and force herself to sleep so that she could temporarily forget everything, but now, her emotions that were about to explode had finally calmed down. She could stop thinking about it for the time being and stop thinking about anything related to him. Even when she heard that he had expelled her from the sect and demolished her side hall, she was still able to remain calm and collected. Progress. This was progress. Therefore, if she could walk out of it, she would definitely be able to. It was only a matter of time. Time was the best medicine for healing. If 3 years were not enough, then 5 years would be enough. If 5 years were not enough, then 10 years would be enough. She had plenty of time to waste. She would hypnotize herself like this once a day, and the effect of this self-hypnosis was pretty good. She was now able to sleep soundly a few times. Unlike a few days ago, she would have nightmares whenever she fell asleep. In her dreams, it was either a world of ice and snow, or she was helplessly bobbing up and down in the copper cauldron. She had a good night's sleep and woke up earlier than usual. She looked out of the window and saw that the sky was still dark. There were a few stars in the night sky. She lay on the bed for a moment, and after thinking for a while, she decided to go out and cultivate. The spiritual energy here was extremely abundant, and it was a good place to recover and cultivate. Just when she opened the door, a person suddenly fell through the door. Ning Xuema was shocked and subconsciously took a step back. That person fell to the ground with a plop. Chapter 1368. That person had quick reflexes. He jumped up and almost hit the door frame in a daze. After he steadied himself, he seemed to realize what had happened and looked at Ning Xuema. His eyes were a little hazy, and it was obvious that he was not fully awake. His voice was a little hoarse. Momo. Ning Xuema, why did Shuailan choose to lean against her door instead of sleeping on his bed in his room? Ning Xuema looked at the faint shadows under Shuailan's eyes and was even more speechless. He must have been leaning against her door for a few days now. How did she not notice? She hugged her arms. Why are you sleeping here? Shuailan seemed a little embarrassed and laughed. I'm feeling a little warm. It's cooler to sleep here. What kind of reason was that? Ning Xuema. Why don't you go back to your own room? Shuailan did not answer her question and changed the topic. Momo, you woke up early today. What do you want to eat? I'll make it for you. However, he sighed in his heart. He could only have a good night's sleep when he was closer to her. He was always afraid that Ning Xuema would disappear when he woke up in his room. He wanted to watch over her all the time, but he knew that Ning Xuema would not allow him to sleep in the same room as her. Therefore, he secretly leaned against her door to sleep. Every day, he would go to Mount Yuehua again before she woke up. He had been doing this from the beginning, and Momo had never noticed. He thought that he wouldn't be discovered, but he didn't expect that Ning Xuema would wake up earlier than usual, and he also fell into a deep sleep. Ning Xuema looked at him for a long time and paused. You don't have to be so worried. If I want to leave, I'll let you know in advance. Shuailan looked down slightly and nodded. He then went to prepare dinner for her. Ning Xuema stood there for a moment, then smiled and shook her head. She had never thought that Shuailan would have such a silly side to him. She found it funny and felt touched. At the same time, she also felt a little heavy. Shui Lan was too infatuated with her. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to repay him in the future. She turned and went into the room. Since she had found out once, he probably wouldn't do it again, right? But it turned out that Ning Xuemo was wrong. For the next few days, Ning Xuemo woke up earlier and earlier. Every day, she would see Shui Lan leaning against her door and sleeping. Ning Xuemo was speechless. Finally, on the third day, she found him at the door. She pulled him into the house and looked into his eyes. How can you be at ease? Every day when I think about you sleeping outside my door, I have nightmares. Shui Lan's face was slightly pale. You had nightmares even when I was guarding the door. Then I won't guard it in the future. Only then did Ning Xuemo let out a sigh of relief. Her palm patted his shoulder. Now that's more like it. She then pushed him towards the door. All right, you can go do your own thing. Shui Lan smiled and left. Ning Xuemo was about to close the door when she inadvertently looked up. She seemed to see a white shadow flashing on a big tree in the courtyard. Her heart suddenly jumped, and her face turned pale. Who's there? Her voice was almost shrill. The branches and leaves of the big tree swayed, but no one came out. She suppressed her heartbeat and opened her eyes to look carefully. Although the branches and leaves of the big tree were dense, if there was someone hiding, it still couldn't escape her eyes. Was she seeing things? Ning Xuemo stood still and stared at the big tree for a long time. In the end, she was still worried and slowly walked over. Chapter 1369. She was already at the 9th level of the Earth stage. Ordinary camouflage wouldn't be able to escape her eyes. Furthermore, she had always had the ability to see through other people's disguises. Back when she was at the 2nd level of the Earth stage, she could easily see through the disguises of her senior brothers. With her current level, there was probably no disguise in this world that could escape her eyes. She walked in a circle around the tree, looking up and down at every branch and slit. There were no abnormalities. She was indeed seeing things. She closed her eyes slightly and seemed to heave a sigh of relief or something else. She raised her hand and knocked on her head, muttering to herself, "Indeed, I'm seeing things. It seems that I've been lacking sleep recently." After taking 2 steps, she turned her head and sniffed. There seemed to be a slight smell of alcohol on the tree. The smell of alcohol was very faint, but Ning Xuemo could smell that it was the most famous local liquor. Its alcohol content was comparable to the burning knives of her era. Her heart skipped a beat. Who would be leaning on this tree and drinking? Could it be? Her heart felt like it was being grabbed by something and constricted. At that moment, she even felt like she was suffocating. She froze on the spot for a moment and suddenly laughed. What was she thinking about? How could that person be here? He was probably playing chess and drinking tea on Tianyin Peak, enjoying his leisure days, or touring with Yunxi. Why would he be here? Besides, he always drank tea. She had been with him for so long, but she rarely saw him drink. Even if he did, he would drink the best wine that he brewed himself and not the common wine here. He was really being overly paranoid. Perhaps Shui Lan had leaned on this tree to drink. That was completely possible. After figuring this out, she finally heaved a sigh of relief. Without any hesitation, she turned and walked towards the training field. The sky was about to turn bright. It was a good time to practice martial arts. No matter what, it would be better to practice martial arts. The higher the level, the less likely it would be for her to be taken advantage of. The less likely it would be for her to be stepped on like mud. The night was like wisps of silk. The graceful figure gradually disappeared into the distant forest. On one of the branches of the big tree, a white figure gradually appeared. He was holding a wine gourd in his hand. His long hair was loose and unbound. He looked in the direction that Ning Xuema had left, slightly lost in thought. Just now, he was not paying attention and almost exposed himself. Fortunately, his kung fu was very high and his invisibility skill was at its peak. When Ning Xuema was searching the tree, she almost stepped on the corner of his clothes. Her hair even brushed against his cheek. He smelled the faint fragrance on her body again. It was so familiar that it made his heart palpitate. In that instant, a desire arose in his heart, a desire to fiercely pull her into his embrace. But she quickly brushed past him and jumped down the tree. He saw her leaning against the tree trunk as if she was thinking about something. Her bright red dress was extremely dazzling in the night, and it burned his eyes like a raging fire. He leaned against the tree trunk and pursed his lips as he looked at her. She seemed to have thought of something funny. She smiled and shook her head. What was she laughing at? Shinjioli could not help but be lost in thought. Could it be that she was moved by Shuilan, that bastard, sleeping at her door every night? He could not help but tilt his head back and take another sip of wine. As the strong wine entered his throat, his heart burned. Chapter 1370. After thinking for a moment, his figure flashed and disappeared without a trace. Shuilan was very meticulous. This house was originally created by him using a spell, but the layout was very appropriate. Each hall and each pavilion were ingenious, which was the style that Ning Xuema usually liked. Even this martial arts field, according to Ning Xuema, as long as there was a flat piece of land, it would be fine. However, the martial arts field that Shuilan created was a lawn. The grass here was neater and softer than the grass that was mowed by the sanitation workers in the modern city. When practicing martial arts on the grass, she would not bump into anything, the grass was very clean. If she was tired, she could lie down on it and it would be a ready-made grass mat. Ning Xuema had already laid down on it several times. The faint smell of the grass filled with the smell of the fields seeped into her nose, making her forget all her worries. At this moment, Ning Xuema had just practiced a round of boxing and stretched her muscles. After she broke off with Shinjioli, although he did not destroy her martial arts, she did not want to practice the martial arts that he taught her anymore. Fortunately, she already knew a lot of miscellaneous skills. In addition, she was a secret agent, so she had her own way of warming up. For example, she was now practicing Tai Chi. Each move was very professional. Shinjioli sat on a tree not far away and watched her practice. He had already watched her practice for several days. The fist and palm techniques that she used to warm up were very strange. He was familiar with the martial arts of this world as easily as he was familiar with his palm prints. He even knew the martial arts of the demon world. However, he had never seen someone like Ning Xuema. It was not like any of the three realms of immortals, demons, or humans, but it was faintly familiar to him. 10 years ago, when he was with her, she should have practiced these fist and palm techniques in front of him, right? Where did she learn these martial arts? These days, he had secretly investigated Ning Xuema's true origin. She was a nine-tailed fox in her previous life, but in this life, she was a real person. It was obvious that she had reincarnated, or perhaps she had possessed the body of the original owner. Ning Xuema's deeds in vast sky country were widely spread, so he could easily find out everything about her in vast sky country more than 10 years ago. After a little analysis, he knew that she was reincarnated in another body. However, the things that happened between him and Han Shanhua and Ning Xuema were still unknown to others. At most, they only knew the surface of it. After looking through the information for a long time, he only found out that she had once been his concubine, and it seemed that he had taken advantage of the situation to force her, because all his memories had disappeared. Shinjuli didn't quite understand what he was thinking at that time. How could he be so fond of a good-for-nothing girl? Forced marriage, this was not his usual style of doing things. However, judging from this message, he had never treated her as a real disciple. It was more like a joke. Later on, he had even brought Ning Xuemo to attend the wedding of the current crown prince of vast sky country, Ji Yunhuang. He had even let Ning Xuemo sit on the same level as him, receiving the worship of the courtiers. It was obvious that he had the thought of marrying her at that time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed her to sit on the same position at that time. After he regained this disciple of his, he felt that his feelings for this disciple of his were extremely strange, so he secretly went to investigate the past. After he found out, he understood that when he took her as his disciple 10 years ago, he didn't take her as his disciple at all, but as his wife. Chapter 1371. No wonder he didn't feel uncomfortable when he hugged her. No wonder his heart felt like it was being scratched by a cat when he saw her being wronged. In his previous life, he was stabbed by her when he fell in love. In this life, what would happen to him when he fell in love? 10 years ago, he didn't have the memories of Shui Emo, but he fell in love with her again. 10 years later, he had accidentally recovered his memories from his past life and recognized her as Shui Emo. He had even forgotten what had happened between him and her 10 years ago. Was this because the heavens were afraid that he would repeat the same mistakes, so they had done this? Shinjuli raised his head and drank another mouthful of wine. He looked down at Ning Xuemo, who was cultivating. She was probably tired from cultivating. At this moment, she was lying down on the grass with a grass stick in her mouth. She looked up at the sky, not knowing what she was thinking. At this moment, the sky was already bright. The blue sky, white clouds, green grass, and red-clothed beauty were all very pleasing to the eye. Shinjuli had never liked red things, but when Ning Xuemo wore this red dress, he felt that it was very fitting and beautiful. It was as if she was born to wear this dress. Only by wearing this dress could it match her temperament. It was a pity that Shuilan also liked to wear red. When they stood together, he felt that it was very dazzling. He still hadn't thought of what to do next. He told himself that he should follow them for a while. He had always been patient, and this time was no exception. Ning Xuemo suddenly sat up. She looked around cautiously. There was no one. There was no one. She couldn't even see a wild rabbit in the area closest to her. Strange, was she being too paranoid? She clearly couldn't see anyone, but she had a strong feeling that someone was spying on her. Ning Xuemo slowly got up and walked around in a circle. Shinjuli lowered his eyes to look at her. He saw her look around, and for a moment, their eyes met. Although he knew that she couldn't see him, his heart still tightened. He held his breath. Ning Xuemo walked around in a circle. She didn't find anything, so she relaxed and sighed. For a moment just now, she even suspected that he had arrived and was spying on her in the dark. With his personality, if he wanted to kill her, there was no need for him to hide in the dark, right? He would unleash a thunderous strike, just like when he killed Wu Mo and was almost slapped to death by Wu Mo's palm. If he were to make a move now, it would only be more powerful than that palm strike. If he did not want to kill her, there was no need for him to peek at her from behind. He was not that kind of person. He had been overly paranoid recently. He had to change that. She took a deep breath and shook her head, trying to get rid of all the messy thoughts in her head. Ning Xuemo felt lonely practicing martial arts in the wilderness, so she decided to sing at the top of her lungs. 10 fingers like instant lotus flower blooming. The girdle looks like a portrait of elegance. Modeled wall paintings were painted with candles facing the gods and Buddhas in the sky. She was singing a song that was widely circulated on the internet, Wen Shuo. Her voice had always been excellent, and she had unconsciously expressed her feelings, so she sang with great emotion. As if singing alone was not enough, she even added a dance, a sword dance. Flute sound alley several times falling down should laugh at me can't see through early encounter, cause an effect waiting to be worn away, become my inner demon even if I can't bear to part with the old moonlight, also wasted. It was Shinjuli's first time hearing her sing and watching her dance since they were reunited in this world. He was a little stunned for a moment, so he pursed his lips and listened. When he heard the last part of the song, his heart was slightly shaken. 10 years in the secular world once with promises, swords scatter tenderness on the temples become floating pavilions. Chapter 1372. The depth of love is like a vine burning like the fire of karma. The sword of today points to the past, once wet who will become the azura of the other's heart. He silently chewed on the lyrics and felt a pain in his heart. Who will become the azura of the other's heart? She had already become the azura of the other's heart. It was an unspeakable wound, a tribulation that he wanted to get rid of but couldn't. What about her? Had he also become the azura of the other's heart? He looked down at her and his mind was in a mess. When he came back to his senses, Ning Xuema was no longer on the grass. She must have left after finishing her practice, leaving only the lingering sound of her singing. Shinjioli raised his hand and a jade flute appeared in his palm. He was about to blow on it when he suddenly thought of something and slowly put it down. Ning Xuema was relieved. Ever since she talked to Shui Lan that night, Shui Lan didn't lean on her door to sleep. She deliberately woke up 2 days earlier and didn't see him when she opened the door. On the third day, Ning Xuema slept until midnight. She suddenly thought of something. She didn't rush to get out of bed but listened for a while. Then, she still maintained her calm breathing as if she was asleep. She quietly got out of bed and quietly went to the door. Her movements were very light, even softer than the sound of a leaf falling to the ground. She abruptly pulled open the door and saw a red shadow flipping over the wall in front of her and disappearing like a gust of wind. The red shadow was so fast that she could only see a dreamlike afterimage. If it wasn't for her amazing eyesight, she wouldn't have even seen the afterimage. Ning Xuema was speechless. It turned out that it wasn't that he didn't lean on her door to rest, but that he was more alert. The moment she made a move, he would disappear without a trace. Ning Xuema clenched her fists. Shui Lan was such an idiot. Wasn't he tired of sleeping like this? No wonder she saw the dark circles under his eyes getting heavier. So that was why. She lowered her eyes and thought for a moment. Then she steeled her heart and ran directly to Shui Lan's courtyard. She anxiously knocked on his door. After a while, Shui Lan came out with a sleepy look. Momo, it's the middle of the night. Are you looking for me? Act. You can keep pretending. Ning Xuema didn't say anything. She pushed him away and barged into his room. Without saying anything, she touched the messy quilt on his bed. The blanket was ice cold, without the slightest warmth of someone who had slept here before. It was obvious that Shui Lan had run back in a hurry. When he heard that she had arrived, he pulled the blanket aside to create an illusion. Shui Lan saw her touch his blanket, and his expression changed slightly. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Ning Xuema crossed her arms and looked at him. Shui Lan, don't you have anything to say to me? Say what? Shui Lan was stubborn. Ning Xuema was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. She pulled him away and said, "Come with me." Shui Lan was nervous. He was afraid that Ning Xuema would get angry and throw him out. He couldn't help but say, "Momo, I didn't do it on purpose. I'm just a little scared." He was too worried about his gains and losses. He could only take a nap and rest while standing guard outside her room and listening to her shallow breathing. He was already very careful. Even if he took a nap, he would always keep an ear open to listen for her movements. As long as he heard her get out of bed, he would immediately run away so that she couldn't see him. He didn't expect that she would catch him off guard in the middle of the night. She caught him off guard and found out. Chapter 1373. How would she treat him? Would she feel restrained again? Would she feel like she was being imprisoned by him again? Shui Lan didn't know what Ning Xuema was up to now, but he couldn't bear to break free from her hand. Thus, she pulled him into her room. After entering her room, he was slightly stunned. Ning Xuema's room had an extra bed with a complete set of bedding. Ning Xuema pressed him onto the bed. You sleep here. Stop sneaking around and acting like a door god. The bed was very ordinary, and the bedding was also very ordinary. Shui Lan's chest felt warm. It was as if there was a warm current rolling around. Momo. He called out to her, but he didn't know what to say. Ning Xuema laid down on her own bed. Okay, let's sleep. Shui Lan slowly laid down on the small bed. He looked at Ning Xuema's side profile, and his chest felt as if there were waves rolling in the ocean. Ning Xuema was also a little sleepy after being tormented for so long. She closed her eyes and wanted to sleep again. However, there was one more person in the room, and the one more was Shui Lan. She felt a little uneasy, and she didn't know what to feel. She had to get used to it. Everything would be fine once she got used to it. Once upon a time, didn't she and Shinjiuli sleep in the same room? Even when they slept on the same bed, it didn't feel awkward. She even rolled into his arms when she was asleep. Stop. She couldn't think about him anymore. Sleep, sleep. She tried her best to adjust her breathing and cultivate her sleepiness. Momo, can't you sleep? Shui Lan's voice suddenly sounded from nearby. Ning Xuema was shocked. She quickly opened her eyes and found that Shui Lan had already dragged his bed closer to hers. The distance between the two beds was only about 10 centimeters. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was Shui Lan's enlarged handsome face. She subconsciously retreated into the bed and frowned. Why are you so close to me? Momo, I remember there's a saying in the human world, even in bed, we can talk at night. Let's talk too. What is there to talk about? Let's sleep. Ning Xuema leaned inwards, subconsciously keeping a certain distance from him. Momo, if you have a piece of moonlight iron, what kind of weapon do you want? Sword. Ning Xuema yawned. I don't want a sword. I want a saber. Machete. Shui Lan was stunned for a moment. I don't think a machete is suitable for you. Swords are prettier for girls. Weapons are used for self-defense and killing, not for show. Ning Xuema yawned again. I'm not interested in any kind of sword. In fact, she was now scared of any weapon that looked like the MA piercer. Shui Lan was also a smart person. He suddenly understood. His eyebrows slightly curved. Okay, then I'll make a saber. After talking with him, Ning Xuema felt less sleepy. She was somewhat curious. You have moonlight iron. Shui Lan smiled and spread his palm flat. A large piece of moonlight iron appeared in his hand. It was a very large piece. It was half the length of his arm. In the room, it flickered with a moonlight luster. The best quality. The best quality moonlight iron. It was simply the ancestor of moonlight iron. Ning Xuema suddenly opened her eyes wide and stared at the piece of moonlight iron. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned and stared at Shui Lan. You've been going out early and coming back late these days. Are you looking for moonlight iron? Shui Lan smiled. I'm quite lucky. I actually found a large piece so quickly. Chapter 1374. Ning Xuema had also made moonlight iron before, so she knew how hard it was to make it. It was even harder than winning the lottery. It was rare for him to have the heart to go out early and return late every day to make this for her. Her heart was a little sour, but also a little warm. She took the moonlight iron and looked at it. I think this piece of iron can be used to make 2 weapons. Then how about we make 2 weapons? I also lack a suitable weapon, so let's make a pair of knives. Shui Lan's eyes sparkled. Ning Xuema's heart jumped. Wouldn't that make it a couple's knives? Shui Lan looked into her eyes. Momo, don't worry. This piece of iron can be used to make your machete first, and I'll make a small knife with the rest. He only wanted to have one thing that he could share with her. Ning Xuema turned to look at him. You're thinking too much. I'm not afraid of not having enough materials. Shui Lan finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then there's no problem. Don't worry. I'll definitely make the best knife in the world for you. Ning Xuema couldn't help but sigh. Shui Lan, you don't have to be so good to me. She only promised to try it with him, but she didn't say that she would marry him. Him doing this made her feel even more burdened. Momo, you deserve the best. No matter how good I am to you, it's never too much. You don't have to do anything. You just have to give me a chance to be good to you. Shui Lan's eyes sparkled like the moonlight in the night. Ning Xuema didn't say anything. She looked at Shui Lan in a daze. The moonlight in the room was half bright and half dark. Under the moonlight, Ning Xuema's skin was like jade, and her eyes were like a lake under the moonlight, sparkling and shining. Perhaps the moonlight was too beautiful, but the atmosphere in the room gradually became ambiguous. By the time Ning Xuema noticed something, she was shocked to find that Shui Lan's face was already less than a foot away from her. Ning Xuema's body stiffened as his hot breath blew against her face. Instinctively, she wanted to retreat, but Shui Lan sighed softly. Momo. His lips came down on hers. Ning Xuema's heart suddenly trembled. She wanted to raise her hand to stop him, but she seemed to have thought of something, and her hand fell halfway. His lips touched hers, and she clenched her fists to stop herself from rejecting him. She had to take this step. She closed her eyes, wanting to accept the kiss. Boom. The perfectly fine window frame suddenly shattered into pieces. That loud noise shocked the 2 people whose lips had just touched. Before Shui Lan could react, a beam of white light smashed towards him with the force of a thunderbolt. He hurriedly rolled out of the room. His movements were as fast as lightning, and he managed to dodge the fatal blow. However, the bed under him was not so lucky, and it was directly smashed into wood chips. Shui Lan directly rolled on the ground. He didn't even have the time to jump up when another white light shot over. This time, it hit his chest directly. If it hit him, Shui Lan's chest would have a big hole, and he would die immediately. Stop! Ning Xuema shouted. In this critical moment, she didn't have time to think carefully. Her body flashed, and she directly threw herself onto Shui Lan, using her back to block the white light. That white light was about to hit her back, but it was forcefully moved to the side. With a loud bang, Ning Xuema's bed disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuema was still in shock. Before she could do anything else, her back was suddenly tightened, and she was lifted upside down. At the same time, another beam of white light hit Shui Lan, who was still on the ground. Chapter 1375. Shui Lan hurriedly rolled to the side, dodging the white light's pursuit. Then, he stood up like a carp. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. It was so fast that no one had time to think. Everything was instinctive. Shuailan finally saw the true face of the person who attacked him. Shinjiuli. He appeared in the room, his white robe fluttering in the wind. His murderous aura was overflowing. Ning Xuema was held in his arms and couldn't move for a moment. Shinjiuli. What are you doing here? Let go of Momo. Shuailan threw himself at Shinjiuli. Shinjiuli didn't have any intention of speaking. His left arm was still holding Ning Xuema. He raised his right hand, and a ball of light formed in his palm. Then, he threw it at Shuailan. It could be said that Shuailan had fought with him a few times, but this was the first time he tasted a killing move that could directly smash a person into pieces. That white light was extremely powerful. As soon as it was released, it carried a power that could destroy the heavens and exterminate the earth. The other furniture in the room was like paper. Wherever the white light passed, everything turned into fine powder. Those broken pieces were also wrapped in the white light. Between the heaven and earth, a dazzling white light appeared. That power was not something that Shuailan could resist at this moment. Shuailan threw caution to the wind. He didn't have any intention of retreating. He gritted his teeth and charged at the white light that could destroy him 300 times. At the same time, he released a red light. Put down Momo. Bang! With a loud sound, the red light and the white light collided. It was as if two atomic bombs had collided. The white light smashed apart the red light as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Shuailan's body flew out like a kite and crashed into a rock not far away. He immediately vomited blood. Before he could catch his breath, the white light came at him again. At this moment of life and death, Shuailan also went all out. He couldn't dodge in time and could only set up another protective barrier. However, how could this barrier, which he had hastily set up, be a match for the furious Shinjiuli? The white light once again destroyed Shuailan's protective barrier like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. Shuailan's body was once again sent flying like a rag. At this moment, the buildings and pavilions here were all affected by the destructive white light, flying into the air one after another. The originally clear sky with few stars was now covered by the flying debris and dust. The ground beneath their feet was shaking, and everything was being destroyed. When Shuailan was sent flying for the second time, he crashed into a big tree behind him. The incomparably sturdy tree, which was as thick as a pig's waist, was actually uprooted by the force of the collision. Shuailan's vision suddenly turned black. He felt that this collision seemed to have knocked out his internal organs. His body slid down the tree, spitting out a mouthful of blood. He couldn't get up for a while. Stars appeared in front of his eyes, and he saw that the white light was condensing again, but he didn't have the strength to dodge it. His heart turned cold, and he subconsciously closed his eyes. He didn't expect that after practicing hard for so long, he was still far from being Shinjiuli's opponent. Especially when the other party was furious, he didn't even have the chance to fight back. Chi! There was a soft sound, as if something sharp had pierced through flesh. The smell of blood seeped out of the air. Shuailan hurriedly opened his eyes. What he saw in front of him made him hold his breath. Ning Xuema's palm had a sharp knife pierced into Shinjiuli's stomach. Shinjiuli's face was pale, and his pair of deep blue eyes looked at her in disbelief. You. Chapter 1376. Ning Xuema's heart was beating wildly. Her face was also deathly pale. She suddenly slammed her palm down on his chest. Bastard, let go of me. Shinjiuli did not dodge and allowed Ning Xuema's palm to land on his chest. She had used quite a bit of strength, causing his body to sway slightly. His arm finally loosened, and Ning Xuema took this opportunity to jump back 3 feet, far away from his aura. She stood there, feeling her fingertips tremble. The moment she saw him, her heart beat like thunder. Before she could find the proper reaction to him, he had already launched a series of killer moves on Shuailan. Each move was more ruthless than the previous, and each move was more deadly than the previous. In a split second, her anger rushed to her head. Why was he not willing to let her go? Why did he want to kill Shuailan? She was so angry that she couldn't help but protect Shuailan. However, she didn't expect that she wouldn't be able to protect him at all. Instead, she was lifted up by him like a little chick, and then held tightly in his embrace. He held her so tightly that she almost couldn't breathe. She struggled with all her might, but she was unable to break free from his hold. She could only watch as he hit Shuailan again and again, throwing Shuailan around like a rag. He was about to fall to his death. At that moment, her blood rushed to her head. Did he think that he could do whatever he wanted just because he was a god? Did he think that he could trample on anyone's dignity? Did he want to catch her and cook her in his copper cauldron? She struggled even harder, but couldn't free herself for a moment. Seeing that Shuailan was about to lose his life under her palm, she finally couldn't bear it any longer. The moment she struggled to free her arms, she also pulled out the knife she had hidden in her storage space. Without thinking, she stabbed at his abdomen. She just wanted to force him to let go. She didn't expect to really stab him, nor did she expect to really hurt him. However, this was not the time for her to think about anything else. After she escaped from Shinjuli's grasp, she subconsciously stood in front of Shuailan, shielding him behind her. She held her saber across her chest and looked at him warily. She watched as the white robe between his abdomen was quickly dyed red with blood. The bright red color stung her eyes. Shinjuli lowered his eyes and looked at his white robe. He slowly raised his head and stared at Ning Xuema. He watched as she stood in front of Shuailan like a mother hen protecting her chicks. Her intention to protect him couldn't be any more obvious. His face became even paler. His arm, which was about to make a move, slowly drooped down. Ning Xuema, in this life, you still chose him. His voice seemed calm, but if one listened carefully, one would notice a slight tremor in his voice. Ning Xuema's mind was buzzing at this moment. While countless emotions were roaring in her chest, her mind was blank. She only had one instinct left. She could not let him really kill Shuailan. She could not let him catch her and cook her. She suddenly took a step back. Shinjuli, you and I have already cut off all ties. If you want to clean up the sect, come at me. Let him go. He announced to the public that he had cut off all ties with her. He also wanted to clean up the sect himself and not let any sect interfere. Now, he had finally found her. He was finally going to clean up the sect. The knife in her hand was still dripping with blood. She pointed the bloody tip of the knife at her own dantian. Are you going to take back the Sun Moon sect's martial arts that you taught me? You don't have to do it, I'll do it myself. She stabbed the knife at her own dantian. Chapter 1377. She and Shuailan were no match for him even if they worked together. If she did not do something, she and Shuailan would die under his hands. Anyway, she did not want the Sun Moon sect's martial arts anymore. She would just destroy herself and return it to him. A white light shot out and hit her saber, sending her saber flying. Ning Xuema's wrist was numb from the shock. She suddenly raised her head, her eyes filled with grief. Shinjuli, I've already escaped here, but you still won't let me go. Fine, come on. If you want to kill me, do whatever you want. She took a step in his direction. Shinjuli's fingers were also trembling. He wanted to say that he had never thought of cleaning up the sect. He wanted to say that he did not want her to be his disciple anymore. That was a joke, and there was no need for that joke to continue. He wanted to say that it was not that he did not want to let her go, but that he could not let himself go, but under such circumstances, he could not say it. She stabbed him again for Shuailan. She protected Shuailan behind her and stared at him with hatred. At this moment, he could not say it. Perhaps, it was really time for him to let go. Let go and help them. He finally took 2 steps back. Fine, I'll let you go, both of you. You're on your own now. As soon as he turned around, his white figure suddenly disappeared. Ning Xuema did not expect him to leave just like that. He left so straightforwardly. She was stunned for a moment. She heaved a sigh of relief, but she also felt that she had stepped on air. Her heart was empty. The sword in her hand also fell to the ground. After such a series of events, this place was already beyond recognition. All the houses were gone, and the ground was filled with broken stones and bricks. It was like a gravel field. It was not an ordinary mess. The cozy little courtyard that she had stayed in for more than 10 days was nowhere to be found. Ning Xuema looked around blankly. At this moment, she had the illusion that there was nowhere to stay in this vast world. After such a series of ups and downs, her gaze once again fell on the spot where Shinjioli had been standing just now. There were bloodstains there. Her heart inexplicably twisted, and she abruptly averted her gaze. It landed on Shuailan's body. This time, Shuailan was not lightly beaten. His handsome face was green and red. Blood was still dripping from the corner of his lips. He struggled on the ground, but failed to get up. Ning Xuema calmed herself down and walked over to take his pulse. Shuailan was seriously injured. His heart meridian was almost broken by Shinjioli. Fortunately, his skin was sturdy and his spirit was strong. He could feel that Ning Xuema's fingers were cold as she took his pulse. He comforted her, "Momo, don't be afraid. This kind of injury is nothing to me. I'll be fine after a few days of rest." He was covered in mud and looked rather dusty, but his eyes were bright. When he looked at Ning Xuema, they were like the ripples of a lake. Ning Xuema seemed to be a bit absent-minded. She nodded and casually said, "That's good." Shuailan's eyes dimmed when he saw her like this. However, he immediately regained his spirit and looked around. He couldn't help but clench his fists in his sleeves. The little love nest that he had spent 10% of his strength to build was destroyed by Shinjioli just like that. It was not easy for him to fight for a spot on the bed. This time, he was seriously injured and urgently needed to cultivate to recover. He could not build a new house for the time being. "Momo, let's go into the city." Shuailan held Ning Xuema's cold fingers.